on two different platforms. This is intriguing to me right now. Okay, so the one for YouTube Shorts, I just like opened up on my other device, and that's going. See, there you are in the room. Uh, I'm curious to see if anybody jumps on there or how that works out, regardless. But we're gonna find out. That might fall. Oh, hey, that is okay. All right, YouTube. YouTube, we just entered a new field, a whole new field. Wow. Talk about new discoveries. Something starts getting old and you just don't know what to do with yourself anymore. It's so interesting how the divines will most definitely throw some new element. So, this is actually kind of cool because we're technically live on YouTube Shorts and YouTube Regular. Wow. Okay. We're gonna see how that rolls. What's up, yo? That's I don't what's up, yo? I don't know if you jumped over, but we have been live since 5. But I tried the video in a different format, and so I am currently live on YouTube through their short uh, format, and also I'm live on YouTube through their regular format, so that the screen is like widescreen, like full screen. Because I looked it up and I saw how it was only coming in slender video. Anyways, getting back to uh, the collective unity, the collective whole. It's very, very intriguing and very interesting. And what I've been doing and what I found in the ancient words that I speak, in coming and talking with you, and everything that I wear, and all the things that I am. Um, oh, boom, boom. Oh, cool. Very cool, David. Thanks for watching us on the desktop. Boom, boom. Sweet. And boom. There we go. I think that's working a lot better. All right. I'm developing, but progress, unity, collective coming back, collective, the collective unity that is currently occurring in our field, in our space, in our world is something that I've been working at for years. Now, I'm not taking credit or anything like that, but what I am saying, but what I very much am saying is that I found a very specific formula. I found these ancient words of power. I received permission to speak them. And then when I started speaking them, things started changing. And people couldn't keep up with the change. I could keep up because it was where I was going. It was what I was doing. It was what the path was. So I'd speak these words of power that I read in the morning at times, different times of the day, and they happen to change things. And I noticed after reading them for a good long while that people started making comments personally to me about how time seemed to have sped up. And then I had this one particular conversation. I can't imagine forgetting this conversation. So I had this particular conversation, and the individual, they told me all of this right on these lines. It's time spinning up, and I said, "Yeah," and it started 2 months ago. And they said, "How did you know?" I said, "Cause I told you. I started reading." It's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. And I truly believe that the world has been in such a place, in such a strait, that when I started reading, I looked over some of this stuff and it was like, don't read it unless it is like direly important. If it's not direly important, don't call these spirits, don't call these beings, don't call these powers into existence. It's gonna make you go nuts. And I'm like, yo, things are crazy on this world. My life's going down the toilet back then. All these other, and so I started reading. I saw those words, and I didn't read them like, don't read it. I read it like, now, read it. Read the crap, read it. The voice, the body has power. It has power and it has ability, but only if you believe. Like, belief is the key, and your mind is the engine. And if you just put that belief into the mind, what you believe can come true. What you dream of, it can come true and it can happen. Maybe not in some glorious way, not like you have some big plan, but it can certainly bring in positive energies into the room and create a new environment, create some sort of new shaking up wake up call. And that's one thing I've found with the divine, with the spirit, with the divine father and the divine mother, is that they are ever loving. They always have something new to give to us. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Thank you, Guillaume. Appreciate that. No drama. Absolutely no. Yeah, no drama. I don't even care to watch drama movies anymore. I tell you what, I put on movies over and over and over, and I watch it. I get halfway through a movie or even a quarter way through a movie, and I'm like, I didn't sign up for drama. I don't want drama. I'm not calling drama into my life. I don't want that. That can take a back seat somewhere else. I'm done with drama. And the collective unity, the collective consciousness, the collective of spiritually inclined individuals, that's what I've been doing. That's what I've been spearheading. And there are many others around the world, and they have been reading well before I have. They've been carrying these on, and they still carry these on in various temples around the world, people in their own homes. And it's very interesting because truly, when one looks at the body as the temple and the world, when you take into account the scriptures say to this, if you had enough faith, say to this mountain to move from here to there, is not a temple that we picture in our mind of stone. Absolutely, it would be that mountain. It would be that mountain. And certainly, you are a mountain. You are a mountain. And by going inside, by exploring within the self, use everything on the outside as fuel. Every experience, every emotional encounter, every movie, every song, the wind, the sun, the sky, the plants, use everything as inspirational fuel for going inside and discovering yourself and reflecting within. One thing I've found heavy is that any time that I see that somebody's not doing something good enough, Well, it's not my job to go tell them what to do. And what they're doing may not be my responsibility to know at all. However, if I do want to be, if I do want to affect that situation, then I'm going to care enough to where I'm going to wait and I'm going to go do that work too. I'm going to go help out. I'm going to fine tune it. I'm going to help. I'm going to wait for them to get out of the way. I don't want to interrupt them. I don't want to tell them to do something, I don't want to teach them anything. If they're young, I'll show them an easier way, no doubt. No doubt, show them an easier way. But some people, well, they just don't want to hear that. They just want to do their own thing. Point being is that rather than complaining about something, I do it. And if I'm not going to do it, then I'm appreciative that someone else is doing it. So how dare I complain about what how they're taking care of something I ain't even messing with? What's my plans and what's my goals on a spiritual side of life? Truly, the recognition for each human to realize that they're no superior than another human. Everybody everybody is equally important. Everybody is equally special. And if they haven't found out why they're important, if they haven't found out why they're special, then if it's myself or someone else who comes into their life or a multitude of individuals, one after another, just seemingly by chance, and I add a little bit to what I know and I give a little bit to that individual, and someone else comes along and they give a little bit of wisdom to that individual, and we can see, we can't exactly see what they're going to become, but we can certainly see what they're gravitating towards. We can see where the energy is heading, where the frequency is gathering its potency, and we can add to that. We can add to people rather than trying to subtract from them. And by adding to people, really we are adding to ourselves as well. For as someone else learns who they are, as someone else becomes free to talk. See, that's huge. That's huge. Speech, free speech. Let's talk about free speech. But I ain't talking about free speech like, oh, this is America, you can say free speech. I ain't talking about free speech like that. I'm talking about free speech of talking about things of the spirit, about talking about my own personal experiences or your own, discussing those kinds of experiences, talking about real life, philosophical matters, things concerning God and religion and science without the threat or concern that somebody's going to come and debase me or fight me or get confrontational with me or argumentative in a frustrated, angered way. No, truly, freedom of speech, being able to talk to somebody and being able to share my thoughts without being judged. Now, that tells me a lot about another person. That tells me a whole lot. It tells me exactly where they're stuck. If I mention this portion about God and they start arguing with me, well, I ain't going to talk about Jewish and Egyptian and everything else. I'll just leave it right there and you have a good day. And I'll leave it right there. And so, in that literal sense of things, when I talk to people for the first time, I'm going to introduce information. And this isn't, it's not test, but I'm feeling my territory to see if I'm free to speak or not. Because if I'm not free to speak and I have to watch what I say and I can't talk about this, I can't talk, then I then what I was going to say, me being authentic, me being who I am, is thrown out the window, and I'm turned into somebody's controlled bot. Man, a lack of the ability to speak Now that tells you somebody who's holding secrets. That tells you somebody who's being controlling. That tells you not to share too much with that person. Go find someone else you can talk to. Because this shamanic journey, this wise woman journey, it is beautiful when we find each other. It is beautiful the types of things that we can send to each other's minds, even unknowingly, completely not even trying. It just happens because we're connected. We're connected stronger than blood itself. The spirits, can believe me or not, but the old gods, the creators, they rolling around. They're very much alive. And they're hearing prayers like they never heard before. Never. The only way to truly do good is to come together. To come together in positivity, to come together to share cultural ideas, ways of life, histories of the ancestors, to put together our puzzle pieces. Look, this is what I discovered in life. Boom, check it out. It's pretty cool, huh? You're like, yeah, and you show me something you're into and something that you do. I'm like, whoa, opens up my mind. I never thought about it that way. I never thought about that information. That's a good thing. A curious mind who is, which is open to not just receiving the answer, but digging, getting in the books and taking notes and going through here and pulling up these papers here and going over there and really getting into it because that study and that interest, that curiosity of finding that answer is going to lead your mind to growth for a longer attention span, a longer attention. People, they for a few moments and they're out the door. They can't keep watching, they can't keep listening, they can't keep paying attention to something that is progressively moving forward. Their attention span is shortened. So the longer we increase our attention span through curiosity, through study, through this type of means, then we're going to remember yesterday, the years before that, the years before those, all the way into the years of our ancestors many years ago. And that collective unity, that plan, the plan isn't the end result. I believe truly as people are coming together, we're going to reach a pinnacle and a point where that energy is just solid. And when that happens, every single person in the world is going to change, not because of force, but because of frequency. Absolutely. Absolutely. Goal two. You only live once. Hmm. I'm going to read this. It says, do you feel. Oh no, where'd you go? Do you feel that normal people's sense of self gets in the way of their empathy? I feel my autism makes my sense of self very fickle, but that's not a bad thing. That sense of self, Okay, let's talk about the ego. Let's speak about this for a moment. Now, the ego, many people speak about killing the ego, but I don't ever hear anybody talking about resurrecting it, giving it new life. Okay, so the ego becomes, let's talk about being a kiddo at first, right? We're a kid, we're having a good time in life, and everything seems pretty hunky dory. We go through some traumatizing things. Some older kids introduce us to something or another, and then all of a sudden, that innocence of being a kid, it's gone. That innocence no longer exists, and we start being introduced to new things. We're not just playing, we're not just having fun anymore, we're not just exploring the world, we're now actually doing growing up things, right? That's when a person starts to become indoctrinated into society as it is. Okay, so then there are particular dependencies, there are particular side effects, there are particular pleasures, there's our pros and cons to what the world provides as far as living a normal life. Okay, those conditionings wind up crafting, it winds up shaping, winds up molding the ego, the energy of the body, the mind, which is the body is seeing the entire body. Okay, and now it's accustomed to these habits and these ways of life. I get mad when I'm not happy. I argue when I don't agree. I fight when I don't have what I want. Things like that nature. Okay, so the ego, very much that portion of the mind, does see things differently. Is that to say that they see wrong, that they would, empathy would be misplaced? I disagree with that. It can certainly cause selfishness. Those seven deadly errors, okay, I call them sins. Those seven deadly errors, because those errors, such as greed, does lead to death. Greed does not lead to life; it leads to death for many other people because one person is greedy and keeping so much. So yes, the ego, the mind, does need to go through a transformative state, of which a lot of people are going through these days, in which the spirit realm is being very much opened to the normal person these days, whether they like to admit it or not. A lot of them, they're seeing it, they're having thoughts, they're experiencing these things. The gods are very active. The divine father and the divine mother are very righteously concerned about this planet and where it's been going. So if the ego does go through a death, resurrection, transformation process, things are much more better. Things, as you're aware in your mind, that you can see beyond the immediate cycles that people are literally stuck in. People are just stuck in. If somebody could jump out and say, "Look, I'm not working a 9 to 5 anymore," and still have a roof over their head and still eat, I'm sure they would do it lickety split. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about here. And technically, I am out of coffee, and I've got tea. I got or not tea. I've got water. It's just literally hot water this morning. Yeah. And so let's talk about suppression and release. Most of my time is not spent in walking down the street doing life. I'm I really stay cooped up a lot. I stay cooped up, and if I'm not studying, if I'm not exercising my mind in some form or another, then I'm resting. I'm resting because I'm emotionally overwhelmed. Sensory perception overwhelmed. I'm people overwhelmed. And when I say overwhelmed, what I mean to convey is that that energy is so present. I know it's there. I know all that energy is there, but I choose to relax. I choose to rest. I choose to put music on, put a movie on, put a video game on, sit here and twiddle my thumbs doing nothing because that is weightless. I feel none of that other energy. I feel nothing else. I feel at peace. And that peace is very important. It's like a car, a vehicle. If we just ran that vehicle all day and all night, that vehicle is going to need some maintenance. And that vehicle, the gears, the oiling, whatever the case, it's going to need to be taken care of. Though that vehicle that's driven during the day for a little bit and it rests, you put it in the garage, turn the key off, let it rest, it's going to last a little bit longer. You're not going to have to do that maintenance so often because you're taking care of it. You're letting it rest. You're not just running that thing in a race. 24. If you're in a race, that's why you got a pit crew because you're going to have problems. You're going to have to adjust things. You're going to have to fix that, whatever the case, real fast. And so for me, lighting up the chakras in the morning, lighting up the energy of life is very important. And after that work has been done, it's very important for me to rest. It's very important for me to check out. Because, like, let's think about a rattlesnake for a moment. A rattlesnake, boy, any bunch of snakes, they'll stay coiled up and they're going to lunge out for that attack and come right back. Old warfare is spear. You know, a spear got some length on that guy. Huh? You don't have to extend your body all the way into the fray. You don't have to extend your emotions to the point where they wrap up another person. Like, it is important to get involved in things. It is important to be able to move in and affect something for a positive change. This is very, very important to do in life. Though I found for myself that when I did get involved, I got too involved. I got too close. And then when things were over, I was still in the middle messing around when nothing was going on. So over the years, I've learned that if I am going to get involved, if I am going to do something within a matter or a situation in life, in the world of my family, friends, whatever the case, I'm going to move in very quick with my energy and I'm going to move right out. My energy is going to come in and slice through, and it's not holding to anybody. It's coming in to shine light on the lies and the truth that had been hidden. That's what my energy came in to do. Because all somebody needs to do is be aware of what somebody is holding from them. Show them the truth. Let them know what is happening. So, the greatest blessing that can be sent to somebody is to shed light upon their life, that they can see all the dark spaces of their life. Because now they're in control. That's how people take control away from you, is they take options away. They take options away by not telling you information. And if you do things that lead to that area of knowledge, that's when you start getting in trouble because you're poking at the exit door, the exit door of regular old freaking year zero to year 2026 3D lot living. Bro, it's time to update. It is fucking time to update. Shisha. We got AI, drones in the sky with could make an alien mothership look like it was their shisha. And we got people stuck in freaking year one mentality and emotion. Though again, this is why I open up these channels with the spirits, with the divines, which very much correlate to our ancestors and our loved ones and our living families and relatives around the world, even though we don't know their names or know their blood is connected to our blood or anything. If they walk and they got a beating heart, I'm connected with the plants. I'm definitely connected with you. Life is life. Hey there, E4. Very cool, very cool. Wizard. Oh, wow. Uh, come on, I come on, I can do it. Oh, okay, gotcha. Maybe. Let's see if I can. Yo, the comic, I'm gonna make you a moderator. If you'd like to be, you can. If not, you don't have to be or nothing like whatnot. But I appreciate that. There we go. Thank you. thank you. Like I do go for the Egyptian look, but truly that is the tribal connection. That is our collective connection. It's tribal, and tribal could be anything. Tribal is the elements, our ancient roots, and we have all these different words of distinguishment between what they are. Okay, so we've got past some aspects of identifying a person, but again, finding where we connect, finding where we really belong on this world together, not not as if one group of humans is supposed to get another group of humans off, but that we're all to connect, we're all to belong here. And it can work out. It can work out for the better. Kings and queens and presidences and all these kind of people in the world, their mentality and their hearts can shift to a fifth dimension, to a 5D being of consideration and love, not just stuck following patriarchy and the man's role, but and not just getting rid of it either, but allowing the mother to come in, and matriarchy and patriarchy, mom and dad can be like, yeah, this is the way we'll do things. Because events change, circumstances do not allow the same environment to be had day after day after day. So being prepared and being ready for when somebody needs our help, or when somebody's really, really, really not doing good, and I mean really not doing good. It's not time to stick them in a building and shove drugs down their throat. It's time to bring them into a family, because the last time I checked, it takes a community, it takes a village to raise a child. How about you? Last, it takes a village to raise a child. Why? Because that child is going to get into so many things and got so much energy that that one adult can't handle them. That kid needs to learn from more than just one person, and that's take be the example, be be the role model, and shove that in your back pocket and let it fall out and forget about it. But in everything that you do, strive to share the wisdom that you have, because that truly changes somebody's life. It changes it forever. And as a child, that mind is always learning, always yearning for something more. Whether they're aware of it or not, they're reaching for more. They want more in their life. So they gotta go touch everything, because they need experience. They're hungry to learn. And that's why it's important to be like a child, because a child is hungry to learn. An adult, of someone who's older, and they're hungry to learn, that's where it's at right there. A meme called, so it's actually funny because for a time I did this, and then I undid it, but I might do it again. But I blocked every comment with the word Jesus, because you can block keywords. And it does get it. What it shows me is that it's it's a reminder to me that people are bullies. They're bullies. It doesn't matter if it's with faith. It doesn't matter if it's in the name of any word. A bully doesn't listen. They don't learn, and they just tell you and force you to do what they tell you to do because it's the best thing to do and it's going to fix all your problems. And yet their life is so screwed off. Tells me I'm pretty happy where I sit. Reminds me of the love in my heart and how happy, again, I am that my mother, she taught me to not judge. Even though we were in some religions, she taught me not to judge. She taught me not to do those things that ultimately hurt others and myself. Makes me be real appreciative of my past. The devil do lie in every single person. Or do you suppose Jesus was walking in the desert with the devil when he said, "Get behind me"? When I started my journey, I figured I hadn't done anything crazy wrong or nothing. But my mom had passed on and my life was moving in the direction that it was. And I got this notion, looking at religion, and I said, if the devil can't be saved, neither can I. That was my notion. Because if you want to do some real angel work, I mean, shouldn't you try to heal the Son of God? Like, I mean, he was the first light, right? He was the first angel, like Lucifer, Satan. It's the first creation, right? The brightest one. So, wouldn't that's where I began. That's where I began my journey. For truly within every single person lies darkness and light. Every single person is capable of great, wonderful deeds or horrible, disastrous deeds. Follow your heart. Follow your heart. If you feel a way about something, you should follow your heart to create what you want to create and to build what you want to build and to do what you want to do. For that which is righteous within a righteous man's heart to do, or a woman's heart to do, they should do. And they should not be swayed by anybody's opinion, the way they look at them, what they see. Do I need my mother's approval? Do I need his approval? I seek the Divine Father and Mother's alignment. I seek their guidance and their voice. And and I hear it every moment as the thunder is roaring outside. That's that's the love, because you build yourself up, build yourself up, and if you need a little help, I'll build you up too. If there's a subject or information, maybe it's hard for you to be, maybe you're having a difficult time with something, shoot me an email, cetra@yahoo.com, Setchra, cetra@yahoo.com. And a lot of times I miss comments here on the streams. And so you can definitely send me an email there and I'll be happy to look. I do look at that. I check my spam folder and all that good stuff. And we'll be happy to answer any kind of questions on that kind of regard of things. Otherwise, I'm going to jump back into Cicero here. Laelius on friendship. Nothing like a good friend. I tell you what. Oh, actually, that's actually a good comment. Somebody had Katrina had mentioned, said, "Yeah, I'm trying to stop the parasitic beings coming back. Gosh, their attempts are more relentless the higher I climb." And that is very, 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 very true. All right, the more that one increases their spiritual light into the direction of all that is divine, as much as one may improve, at every leg of that journey, there's going to be more that's attracted to you, more of those negative beings that are attracted to you. They're going to learn after a certain while that they can't physically get to you if you continually saying no, if you continually just keep your distance as much as possible. Eventually, they're going to physically stop coming up to you. If you're out of their environment, you leave where they are, you don't accept what they offer you, then that's not going to be a part of your life. And this, at that point, that's when psychic interference really starts to get heavy. That's when the psychic chatter really starts to get heavy. Telepathic communication is tier 2 on magic. There's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 of magic. All right? Telepathy is tier 2 magic. So there are people in the world who are old world giants, and they can't stop you. They have no authority over your life. All they can do is try to interfere with you by sending bad thoughts into the mind, and that's why it is important to safeguard oneself against outside influences. It is good to learn from the atmosphere. It is good to learn from what is happening around me because I want to learn from that. Life is changing. I need to keep up. I need another talk. I need to blah, 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 blah. But at the same token, when I see that that big bunch is not for me, that shit can stay right on over there. I'm going to do my jam right here. Mimi Galto, wonderful, wonderful. I look forward to getting an email from you. Um, So let's talk about water. Let's talk about water. That's actually a great subject to talk about. Now, water, water's water's memory. I'm not even going to block the comments. Water is memory. Water is good. And water is healthy. Now, has water been contaminated? Absolutely. Is there areas in the world where there might be some good water? I'm sure there is. Can you create holy water? Yes. Can you take the bad things out of the water? Yes. Water is from the mother herself. If anybody is telling you something that you should stay away from water, wow, they're on another path. They're on a completely different directive in their life. If you want to follow that, well, I wouldn't. I love water. The body is 70% plus water. Do you know when we filter water, like they have filter systems, when you filter water, it doesn't, it takes away, depending on your filtration system, it's going to be dependent on how much or what actually gets taken out of the water that shouldn't be there. Though in a filter, it's taking things out of the water. And then when you get that bottle of water or you get that filtered water and you drink it and you still feel parched afterwards, that's because the water, yes, it's been filtered and it's empty. There's actually nothing in the water itself. It's not filled with nothing because even the good stuff has been filtered out of it. And then that is why we must remineralize our water. And there's also stones and ways to alkaline your water, and there's other ways to truly bring a benefit to your water. Though water onto the skin, water is life. Kenemetonket is one of the oldest names of the Divine Mother, and it directly translates into the water of life. The water of life. Water is amazing. If you look at water and you talk to it positively, you've heard of the tests. If not, you can certainly look up science of water and you're going to see that water changes its crystalline shape depending on how that water is treated. When we pour water right from the pipes, it's hit a bunch of 90-degree curves. That water's got a little bit angry. It's not too happy. We can actually improve the quality of that water after it's come out. Anyways, yeah, yeah, exactly. And so right on that energy of how we treat water is the exact same way for our own body. If we think of some like if we when we're trying to influence the water and its type of crystalline makeup, we're sending energy to it because it's outside of us. But for instance, and if somebody does something that hurts you in life, if something occurs and one becomes upset, becomes angry, becomes chaotic, becomes saddened, excessively saddened, then inside of the body 70% plus of the body's content is water. That's all inside of us. And that emotion being generated from our mind and our heart and into our gut is resonating either chaos or order. That's why when I find somebody who has wedded themselves to their chaos, I don't hang around that person. I don't talk to them. I'm not interested in anything they have to offer because I know they're emitting a chaotic signal frequency from within their body, and it's actually going to hurt my body just to be next to them. So, why would I even? I would never, ever even want to get emotionally connected to that person. Ever. I'm going to go use the bathroom real quick. And when I come back, we're going to jump into Cicero. So, water literally does have memory. Okay, now think about think about holy water. All right, I can't remember the name of the documentary. I can't remember it, but there's a documentary, and I watched, and they actually went in. They took some jugs of water, and they went to a to a synagogue, and like with permission and everything, it was documented and filmed and everything, and they measured the water under the microscope before they took the water to the ceremony at the synagogue, and they got the results and showed that out, and Then they took the water, they put it underneath the main portion of the ceremony, and after the ceremony, they got that water, they took it, they put it under the microscope, and the water looked completely different under the microscope as far as structure versus chaos goes. Structure versus no structure. And so the tones, the ceremony, the people, all of this affected the state of the water itself. Okay, and this is what becomes holy water because it's been infused with the light that you received from source. And anybody can make holy water. I give you, I'll give you if you want to do your own experiment, it's not a challenge, but if you want to do your own experiment, get a glass, make sure it's clean, fill it up with water. I don't care if it's alkaline, I don't care if it's filtered, I don't care where it's from, and put that water in the bottle. And once a day for 20 days. Okay? You could do two bottles of water if you want to taste the difference, but you'll be able to taste the difference. Take that glass, make sure it has a lid, and for 20 days, two times a day, minimum two times a day, bring that water out, take the lid off while you're in an okay mood. You don't have to be all extra happy or nothing, and speak good thoughts or pray over it or whatever it is happy. Do that for 20 days. Okay, when you're done doing it for that day, put the cap back on and make sure that it goes in a spot that is covered, that is dark. You don't want light hitting it, and you don't want it to be around the immediate environment, like back in a drawer cupboard or something like that. Not with people. Not as and if you have nowhere else to put it, you just make sure put it in a drawer or something like that, and away from the light. And but bring it out each day and pray over it, say the good words over it. Do it for 20 days. Don't cut it short. Don't cut it short. After that 20 days, on the 21st day, you try that water. You try that water on the 21st day, and you're even without tasting other water, you're going to be like, whoa, what is this? Who messed with my water? I did it. I did it. I did it for a month straight, and my water tasted as thick as milk. I'm not lying. I'm not lying. The water was as thick as milk because I literally infused that much energy into the water. That's all I drink. That's what my coffee is. That's all I drink. Holy water, water infused with order and divine configuration. That's why I do this every day. It's just in my nature, even if my nature is broken, even if I'm thrown to the side for a while or something. Well, in a moment I have strength within me, I'm gonna get my papers. I'm gonna start reading. I'm gonna do my thing. It might take me a little bit, but I'm gonna get. I'm gonna. That's what I do. It's what I do. Can't break me out of it. Can't. I set this into place because I knew the importance and the value of treating my food important, my water important, because it has an effect how I feel. This is why a child will get their food and they'll take a few bites and then they'll go run and play, and then they come back and they play with their food, and they eat their food, and then they go play, and then come back and they play with their food, and they eat their food, and then they go play because they're literally putting playful energy into their food, and then they eat it. Am I a wizard? Every child alive is a wizard. Nobody put a wand in their hand, taught them how to direct their energy. That's what happened. See, through all of this discipline, what one winds up developing into is the ability to direct their energy through their chosen will. Up until this point, our energy goes wham whenever we get emotionally entangled with something. Change that bit up, take the narrative into possession. Truly, truly, truly. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, exactly. I mean, these are. It is this simple. It is this simple. The amount of things that I've read on spiritual matters for all those instances that were like, that's weird, huh? I go tell you, you noticed something like that? They'd be like, what? No, I never seen that. I'd be like, yeah, I know, I saw what I saw. I go talk to somebody else, and they're like, yeah, I seen that too. And I'm like, fucking knew I wasn't the only one. Okay. We perform magic every day without even knowing that we're doing such things. We are creating the world before us every single day. And so when I started reading the books and reading the old ways and learning about nature and how to connect with nature, I in everything I would read, I would connect with my own experiences, of which we were just talking about. Those those weird moments. And so I plugged those experiences into it, and then I was like, whoa, all those fancy words, all that extra stuff. I was doing it without even knowing all that stuff. I was doing all of it. I've been doing it. People do it. People do it all the time. Is this a cult? Ha 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 ha. No. If anything, I tell people not to follow me. I tell people to like follow your own heart and do what you want to do. Like just friends here, friends, family, distant family. Not by blood or anything like that. Just have common ground. Through the things that we've experienced in life, we've been able to have a certain moral code, and that moral code really is founded respect. If the moral code is founded through respect, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful community. It's a beautiful group of people. There's a bunch of chat and stuff going on. Seems like people have a whole nother kind of world going on down there in the chat, and that I'm aware of. And I'm sure there's other things I need to do on YouTube, but as far as like opening up that venue for people to communicate more together, um, but no, I was stuck in religion. I was bound in religion. for 28 years. And when I got out of that, oh, oh I didn't look back. I was moving forward. Um, people who people have a lot of interests, that's for sure. And one thing I've learned is that we've all lost too much. We've all lost way too much. And so I've come and gone, and I don't join groups because generally I find if something's going on there that I'm not too kosher with, something I don't like, and I'm not interested in creating problems where I don't belong. But if anything, it's just like, if anything, I always said if I had my own group, or if like if I was part of a group, like we would be the outcasts of the outcasts. Because you got you got society, and then you got your outcasts, and then we'd be like the outcasts of those guys. Oh, mhm. Mm. When you hang around somebody long enough, you will discover the realization whether their words were knowledge or whether they were wisdom. Truly, truly, there are many people in this world and they will swindle you for every penny you got. And there are other people and they will fight with you about everything that you don't care about. There's a lot of different types of people in the world, a whole lot of different types. And to truly be able to know who or what type of individual that person was, is to truly examine every aspect we can about our interactions with them. A wise man will read many books, and a foolhardy individual will truly suppose that their one book has the answer to every problem in the world. I love you, my brothers and sisters. I love you, my family. I love you, my friends. I love you, for being my neighbor, for just being in this world because you allow this place to be what it is. You give the future hope. You do. How do I give the future hope? Because you haven't given up. You have not given up. It's interesting, metaphorically speaking, when a group of individuals will dominate a single individual. That a single individual, no matter the merit, no matter the strength, no matter how long the group keeps pushing that individual down, they keep standing back up. They keep standing back up. Shoot, they left that night and the dude just stood up and they saw him at the diner for breakfast, lost their marbles. They thought they did him in. Thought I squashed that one out. Thought I made them feel bad for all the good they ever done. Thought I really twisted their mind and their heart up. I've learned if I stay in my peace, well, I'm not interested in all that other energy, and eventually they will bother somebody else. And I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing. You're strong, powerful, and just because it might look like a state of loss or pain or low, you still kicking. You're still kicking. You're still moving forward. And somehow you still got this notion in your heart that you're gonna do good for the world. Why? Why? They couldn't turn you into them. That's the reality. Your mind and your heart unified the collective field all of us together in mind, in spirit, and our bodies will simply move as a unified group on this world the way it should be in a most loving, beautiful fashion. Laelius on friendship. After the death of Caesar, his assassins Brutus and Cassius rapidly found that the Republic could not be restored as they had hoped. They left Rome and never returned, sailing east from Italy in August 44 BC, and Marcus Antonius rapidly assumed dictatorial control. On the 17th of July, Cicero, disgusted with this state of affairs, set out by sea for Athens from Pompeii, incurring the approval of Atticus, who reproached him for deserting his country. But on calling at the South Italian port of Velia, Cicero learned that a meeting of the Roman Senate had been called for September 1st, and so he returned to the capital where, on the following day, he launched his great series of philippics against Antonius. During the previous miserable months, Cicero had been composing the essay Laelius on friendship, dedicated its recently composed companion piece Cato the Elder, an old age, to his friend, confidant, banker, and publisher Atticus. The treatise takes the form of a discussion. Cicero dates the occasion to 129 BC. Cicero dates the occasion to 129 BC and claims to have heard the substance from Quintus Marcius Scaevola the Algor, whom he attended as a young student and made one of the participants in the debate on the orator, of which a volume is translated elsewhere. In Larius on friendship, the Scaevola takes one of the minor parts. Another figure who appears is Gaius Fannius Strabo, a Roman historian praised by Sallust for accuracy but criticized by Cicero for the roughness of his style. Both these men were sons in law of the famous Gaius Laelius Sarpines, whose exposition comprises far the great part of the work. Born in 186 BC, Laelius was a close friend of Scipio Africanus the Younger, Serpio Armelanus, who had died in mysterious circumstances a few days before the present discussion is supposed to have taken place. While praetor and governor of Near Spain, Larius had served successfully against the Lustanian rebel Veratus and became consul 5 years later. Next to Scipio, he was the most distinguished orator of his day and a master of pure Latin. Some believed him to be the author of Terence's gracefully written comedies. He owed his title Sapiens the Wise to his erudition, especially in philosophy, which he studied under the Stoics Diogenes of Babylon and Panatheus of Rhodes. Laelius' character was greatly praised in antiquity. Laelius on Friendship in earlier times was one of the greatest European bestsellers and exerted a tremendous influence, notably on Dante. But its interest lies not only in this importance through the ages, but in the intrinsic qualities of the work itself. To us who are supposed to be imbued with the Christian doctrine of brotherly love, the treatise may at times sound a little too calculating, or at least distinctly realistic. But to the Romans, for whom friendship meant an intricate affair of practical tit for tat upon which their whole political life was based, it was clear that Cicero was striking a blow for a more idealistic approach than theirs. It is true, he says, that friendship is the regulation of the good of all by mutual service, but it is also based on something more elevated, on a community of feeling. He had read Plato's Lysis and Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics on the subject, and in particular he had studied a monograph on friendship written by Aristotle's chief pupil, Theophrastus. But Cicero is writing in relation to his own society in his own troubled times, and in considering, without some of their thornier points of Theophrastus' treatise, how far personal friendship is compatible with political oppositions that were inevitable at such an epoch. However, friendship is of universal concern, and to read such an intelligent man and such a loyal friend on his theme cannot fail to be of value at any place or time. Indeed, no one else has ever dealt with the subject in so memorable a fashion. To us, the discussion possesses the curious disadvantage that it is restricted to relationships between men, and the same limitation had no doubt appeared in Cicero's main source as in other Greek writings. For this was the social relation which really seemed to matter, and which affected the political life of the community. Concentration on this aspect does not mean that Cicero, on the contrary, the male relation was emphasized just because it was not physical, but moral. Nor was he by any means lacking in a tender side. For instance, he was very fond of children, but his relationships with women were unsatisfactory. His marriage with Tarantia had ended in failure, and the teenager Cordelia, whom he married next, was sent away almost immediately because he showed no grief at the death of his daughter. In 46, Cicero had written to his friend Lucius Papirius Pertus that he met a famous high class prostitute, Cytheris, at a party. As for myself, he remarked, I was never tempted by anything of that sort, even when a young man, much less now that I am old. And then in the Tusculans he wrote quite violently against such love, in which he described with appropriate quotation as utterly trivial and the promoter of shame and inconsistency. Laelius on Friendship. Quintus Mortius Scaevola, the augur, used to call on his abundant memory to tell many excellent stories about his father-in-law Gaius Larius, and whenever he mentioned him, he invariably spoke of Larius the Wise. After I had grown up, my father took me to Scarambola. His idea was that as far as I could manage it and as far as he would let me, I should never be out of the old man's company. Scaevola used to talk about a wide range of subjects with great wisdom and wealth of terse, apt comments. I made a practice of committing every one of them to memory, since I believed his legal learning would provide a very useful addition to my own knowledge. When he died, I transferred my attentions to Quintus Mortius Scaevola the priest, whom I would call the most able and upright man in the whole country, but I shall speak of him on another occasion. Now, I want to return to Scavola the Orca. I remember a great many of the talks we had together, but clearest of all is my recollection of a day at his home. He was sitting in his garden, as he often used to do, in a semicircular arbor. The only other people there besides myself were a few other close friends of his. Scavola hit him up upon a topic. He hit upon a topic which, at just about that time, was on many people's lips. You yourself, Atticus, were seeing a good deal of Publius Sulpicius Rufus in those days, and I am sure you recall what happened. Sulpicius, who was a tribune at the time, had become a deadly enemy of Quintus Pompeius Rufus, after being his most intimate and affectionate friend. And everybody was surprised and sorry, and this occasion Scaevola happened to mention the matter, and then he went on to tell us of a discourse of the subject of friendship which Laertius had pronounced to himself and another man who, like Scaevola, was Laertius' son-in-law, Gaius Farnius, the son of Marcus. This happened a few days after the deaths of Scipio Africanus the younger. I memorized the main points of what Laelius said, and now, after my own fashion, I've set them down in this book. I've done so by bringing the actors on the stage to speak for themselves. My intention was to avoid constant interruptions of I said and he said, since I wanted to make it seem as if they were actually in our company and talking to us themselves. You have often asked me to write something about friendship, and the subject is one which appeals to me deeply. Friendship is something everyone ought to think about, and the theme is particularly appropriate to people who are such close friends as you and I are. For these reasons, I warmly welcome your suggestion, and I do venture to hope that this volume, which has emerged as a result, will be useful not only to yourself, but others as well. When, at your request, I wrote my Carto the Elder, an old age, I made Carto himself, as a very old man, the principal speaker. He seemed to me the most suitable person I could think to talk about that period of life, since it was years and years since he had been anything but old, and he had prospered more than anyone else of similar age. As regards my present subject, however, we have heard from our elders that the friendship which Gaius Laelius enjoyed with the younger Scipio Africanus was outstandingly memorable. It therefore seemed to me that Laelius was the appropriate character to deliver his opinions about friendship, and indeed, according to the recollections of Scaevola, he actually had spoken on the subject. Somehow, expositions of this kind seem to carry special conviction when they're placed in the mouths of personages of an earlier generation, especially when these were eminent men. For example, when I read my own treatise on old age, it sometimes affects me so profoundly that I actually feel it is Cato who is doing the talking and not myself. In that book, I was writing on the subject as the old man to another, and now, in accordance with the same procedure, I am writing about friendship as between friends. In my earlier work, as I said, the speaker was Cato, who lived to almost as great age as anybody else of his time, and was inferior to none of them in talent. Larius, my present spokesman, was another man of exceptional wisdom. Indeed, he was famous for this, but he also provided a conspicuous example of my present theme of friendship. So I ask you to dismiss myself altogether from your mind for the time being, and to imagine that it is Larius who is speaking. At that time we are thinking of, Africanus is just dead, and Gaius Farnius and Scaevola and the augur have come to see their father-in-law Larius. The two visitors start a conversation, and Larius is going to reply. He will devote the whole of his discourse to friendship. Read what he says, and you will recognize yourself. Varnius, when you say Laudius that a finer and more illustrious man than Africanus never existed, you're perfectly right. All the same, you must realize that the person towards whom everyone's eyes are now turned is yourself. People call you the wise, and they do so from profound conviction. Not long ago, that is what they used to call Cato, and we know that Lucius Acilius was similarly described in our father's time, but they were awarded the title for rather different reasons. Acilius earned it because of his own renown as an expert in the law, and Cato because of his wide-ranging experience and the shrewd foresight, resolution, and oratorical skill he had so conspicuously displayed in Senate House and Forum alike. As a result, by the time he was an old man, the designation "wise" had almost become part of his personal name. When you are given the same title, on the other hand, it possesses a rather different significance, for in your case the compliment refers to a wide range of different qualities that you possess. Natural talent, character, industriousness, and learning all play a part. Besides, this term is not applied to you by any means loosely, in the way that ignorant people employ it, but in the accurate sense in which erudite scholars use the word. I'm thinking to the strict type of definition maintained by authorities who are such severe critics that they are not even prepared to admit that the seven sages themselves deserve inclusion among truly wise men. According to this view of the matter, there has never been a wise man in the whole history of Greece, with the single exception of that one individual at Athens who was specifically declared to be the wisest of men by the oracle of Apollo himself. Nevertheless, you too are generally believed to be wise. This is because of your firm belief that your entire well being depends upon yourself and yourself alone, and that all human vicissitudes are insignificant, since the only thing that matters is whether a man is morally good or bad. That is why I'm always being asked, and the same inquiry I understand is addressed to Scarabola as well, how the death of Africanus is affecting you. The inquiries have become particularly insistent because on the noons of last month, when we met at Decimus Brutus country house for our usual discussion of matters concerning the augurs, you did not join us. This attracted attention because you have always been so very meticulous in your attendance on these occasions, as indeed in all your other augural duties. Scarabola, I too have noted that there has been curiosity about your reaction to Africanus' death, but when I am asked about this, I always answer Laelius. What I have seen with my own eyes, that although you have lost a very great friend who is also a very great man, you are enduring your grief with composure. It could not be expected, I go on to point out to them, that your loss would leave you unmoved. You have too warm a heart for that. But your absence from the meeting of our association on the Nons, I assure them, was due to the fact that you were unwell and not because you were mourning. Quite right, replied Laodius Scaevola. What you told them was perfectly accurate. Whenever I am in good health, I have always fulfilled the obligations you mentioned, and I would never have allowed any question of personal convenience to keep me away from them. Indeed, in my view, no man with the slightest sense of responsibility would allow himself to be deflected by considerations of such a kind from the performance of any of his duties whatsoever. Now, Varnius, when you tell me that I am being paid these compliments, I feel quite unable to accept them, nor of course did I ask for them, though it is very kind of you. When you speak of Cardo, however, I do not think your estimate does him justice. It may well be certainly that no such thing as a wise man has ever existed, and I am inclined to believe that this is the correct view. But if there has ever been one, Carto is the man. Even if we leave all the other evidence to one side, think how he took the death of his son. I remember when Paulo suffered a similar loss, and I myself saw Gallus when he too was bereaved, but the sons they lost were only boys, whereas Catos was a grown man who had already revealed his gifts. So I myself feel that Cato ought to be placed at the very top of all, not even after the personage whom Apollo, as you say, judged the wisest in the world. For after all, the man who won Apollo's praise is only honored for what he said, whereas we esteem Cato for what he did. But now to turn to myself, let me tell you both the position, and I assure you that what I shall be saying is accurate. If I were to tell you Scipio's death caused me no sorrow, the philosophers could advise us whether this was the appropriate reaction. But at all the events, it would certainly not be the truth. Of course, I am upset. I have lost a friend such as will never be seen again, or so I must assume. For of this at least I am sure there's never been a friend like him before. Yet I am not without a remedy, all the same, for it is at least a comfort and consolation that I am spared the delusion which causes most people to grieve when their friends have died, for I do not believe Scipio himself has suffered any misfortune. If anyone has suffered a misfortune, it is myself. But if you let your sorrows at such a happening overwhelm you, this shows you how much you love, not your friend, but yourself. As for Scipio, on the other hand, surely everybody must agree that life treated him remarkably well, for unless he had conceived the idea of living forever and thought which surely must have occurred to him, he fulfilled every ambition that anyone could justly pray for. When he was no more than a boy, his fellow countrymen already expected great things of his career, and while he was still a mere youth, his amazing gifts enabled him to satisfy these expectations and even exceed them. Although he never offered himself for the consulship, he was elected consul not once, but twice. On the first occasion, before the minimum legal age, and the second occasion, at the proper time. Proper, that is, as far as he himself was concerned, but none too early for the safety of our country. By overthrowing two cities, the two deadliest foes of this empire of ours, he totally abolished war, not just now, but for the whole of time to come. His engaging manners, his devotion to his mother, his generosity to his sisters, his kindness to his relations, his fairness to one and all, I do not need to mention because both of you have full knowledge of all these things, and as for the great love of his fellow citizens bore for him, this was abundantly displayed by the lamentations at his funeral. So what could he have gained by living a few years longer, even if old age is no burden, as I remember Cato arguing to Scipio and myself the year before he died. Yet it does admittedly take away that vigorous freshness which Scipio never lost. So rich then in fortune and fame was his life that there could have been no way of enriching it further, and so sudden was his death it never felt its sting. About the way he died, it is difficult to speak. You know, both of you, what people suspect. Yet one thing may be safely said. During his lifetime, he enjoyed many days of brilliant popularity and happiness, but the most notable of them all was that final day on which, after the Senate had finished its meetings, he was escorted home towards evening by a vast concourse of his fellow senators, and the people of Rome and our subject allies from all the regions of Italy, and the Latins. So great a hero had he now become that, when he left us, his destination can surely not have been the shades below. He must have been on his way to the gods above. For although some authorities have lately begun to argue that the soul perishes along with the body, so that everything is obliterated by death, I disagree with them. I prefer the more ancient view, which was held, among others, by our own ancestors. They used to pay meticulous reverence to the dead, which they would never have done had they believed that once a person is dead, nothing affects him anymore, and others' beliefs to the same effect that were by those inhabitants of our peninsula whose principles and doctrines brought civilization to Greater Greece, a region which is ruined today, but was flourishing at that time. Besides, there was that man we were speaking of, who, according to Apollo's oracle, surpassed the whole of the rest of the world in wisdom. When most topics were discussed, he liked to argue first on one side and then on the other, but on one subject he maintained a consistent point of view. He declared that the human soul is divine. When it leaves the body, he believed it has the power to take the road back to heaven, and the better and more decently it has behaved in life, the easier this road will be. That was also Scipio's opinion. A conversation he took apart in only a few days before his death seemed to show a presentiment of what was about to happen to him. Philus was there, and Menelaus, and a number of others, and you and I, Scaevola, had gone together and joined them. For 3 days Scipio spoke about the condition of our country, and then, near the very end of his discourse, he turned to the immortality of the soul, repeating what, as he declared, the elder Africanus had told him in a dream. If it is true that when the best men die, their souls have a special opportunity to escape from the imprisoning confinement of the flesh, it would be impossible to think of anyone whose journey to heaven can have been easier than Scipio's. To utter lamentations, then, because of his death, would seem to me a proof of envy rather than friendship. If, on the other hand, the soul perishes at the same time as the body, and all the sensation ceases to exist, then while it is true that there is nothing good in death, it is equally evident that it can have no bad results either. For if sensation has been lost, a man is exactly as if he had never been born, though the fact that Scipio was born brings us joy, and will never cease to bring joy to this land of ours, as long as it remains in existence. Sorry. Mm. Steady progress. There's this one time in my life, and when I was younger, and I would have the idea that I had done way I hadn't done anything, And so I'd be unmotivated to do anything. And so I developed this thinking, I developed a new idea. This new idea correlated very much into that any progress is progress. No matter how small, no matter how great, progress is progress. And when you have steady, when I can maintain steady progress, well, well, what can compete? What truly can compete with regular progress? I'm going to. If you want to explore life, if you want to see what's out in the world, some people have the means and the ability to travel. Other people don't. They're stuck right where they are. TV, media, phones, books, libraries. There's a lot of ways to learn about something, to jump your mind into a new subject, jumps the mind into a new subject. And you're free to learn about any subject you want to read about. You're free to learn about any part of history you want to learn about. And guess what? There's a lot of aspects of history, and there's a lot of aspects of modern day ways of living too. The more you learn, the more you're going to want to do. So then do it. If you can do it, do it. Wear the clothes, speak the language, live it, breathe it. I wanted to go to Japan. I didn't go to Japan, but I wanted to go to Japan. So I started learning the language because I figured if I'm going to go to Japan, well, I at least want to talk or say, hey, where's the bathroom, or thank you, or know that, I at least want to do that. If I just go over to Japan and I'm speaking English, dude, I'm going to be a prick. Straight up, I'm gonna be like, I don't deserve nothing because I'm walking into somebody else's community, somebody else's way of life, somebody else's structure, somebody else's paradigm. I must honor that. And when I get done honoring and being a part of that, maybe the fact is I didn't get to make the trip. But in the way that my dress is, Japanese has had an influence, all right. You can be guaranteed on that one. And so throughout my journey of everything I've learned, of having a different aspect, a different part of the world with me, that's subjects and languages and things that people only see in books and movies and stories, but this guy's real. I carved these Norse Scandinavian runes, ancient Japanese Kuji-in system, hieroglyphs explaining the tree of life. See, the more you learn makes you different. I should clarify, I should restate that. The more you embody that which you learn, the more you act upon that, the more it changes who you are, the more different you become. And then somebody who's only learned one system, one way, they look at you and they have no clue what they're looking at. Well, as far as I go in this world, that's a good thing, because when somebody looks at you and they can size you up and down and know what you are right off the bat, usually that's a bully measuring you, and they're going to come hurt you emotionally, mentally, or any other way they can take advantage of you. I What do I want? I want you to be able to live your life without any bullies in your life. I want you to be able to live your life without somebody thinking negative about what you want to do, and then it stops you from doing it. That's what I fight for. That's why I come on here. That's why I read every day. That's why I'm going to bring something forward that's going to be productive for the mind and the soul and the body in some way, some form, something positive. We're always going to stick with. Sure, we might have to go through this push, but we're always coming. We're always going solid, positive. We're always going to have a solution. If we're going into something, we got a solution to get out of it. I think about my chi. I think about my reborn ego, my divine self, my higher mind, and I put I put together martial arts and what I've learned of that working of the body. If one can do that kind of work with their energy, if one can truly plant their energy, and when somebody's coming at it, it's just a simple move, and that person just goes right on. Don't even bother me none. Because truly, all fighting, it's a dance. Fighting is just a dance. It's just energy. It's just energy moving. When you, when one works with their own energy field and understands their own energy field, it's just a dance. It's just a dance. It's not. It's one person might have emotion raging forward, but when a stable source of consciousness can see and know its own energy, it can certainly navigate the environment around themselves. And so I say once again that all has gone very well with him, but less well with myself. I entered life before he did, and it would have been more appropriate for me to depart from it first as well. Yet so happy are my recollections of our friendship that I feel convinced that my life has been a good one, because I've spent it with Scipio. Both in our public and private lives, he and I have shared all the same interests. We lived in the same home. We soldiered together in the field. Our tastes and aims and views were identical, and that is where the essence of a friendship must always lie. As for my reputation for wisdom, which Farnius just mentioned, it is quite it is quite undeserved, and in any case, it satisfies me less than the hope that my friendship with Scipio will go down to posterity. This is a hope which I cherish all the more keenly because throughout the whole course of history, the pairs of friends who have been lastingly remembered only amount to barely three or four at the very most. It is my greatest desire that future generations will add the friendship to Scipio and Latius to this small number. Fannius in response. That is a hope, Labius, which will be fulfilled. There is no doubt about that. But you touched just now on the question of what friendship really means. Since we are free of public business at the moment, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor, and I know I'm speaking for Scavola as well. When people seek your views, whatever the topic may be, they always find you most obligingly ready to answer their queries. Now, will you please speak about the friendship in the same way? Tell us how you would define it and let us know the principles you consider it involves. Scaevola in response says, yes, do please talk to us on the subject if you will. I shall be quite as delighted as Phornius indeed when he asked you. I was just about to ask, I was just about to make the same request myself. So you would be doing us both a very great favor. Claudius in response. He says, I should be willing enough to do as you say, if I felt in the slightest degree confident of saying anything worthwhile. The subject certainly is a splendid one, and as Varnius remarked, we have the spare time. But who am I to do such a thing? And what are my qualifications? The people who offer discourses of this kind tend to be scholars and Greeks, and that speakers who claim the ability to deal with any subject you care to set before them without the slightest preparation. But that is a formidable thing to attempt and needs a lot of practice. So, if you want a comprehensive discussion about friendship, I advise you to apply not to me, but to the men who make a profession of such speeches. All I myself can do is urge you to the place friendship above every other is to place friendship above every other human concern that can be imagined. Nothing else in the whole world is so completely in harmony with nature, and nothing so utterly right in prosperity and adversity alike. But one point I particularly want to make is this: friendship is only possible between good men. I do not propose to go into this aspect too meticulously, like the people who argue at length that no one is good unless he is wise. That is all very subtle and may well be logically correct, but it possesses little relevance as a practical guide to living. Moreover, even if we concede that the people who put forward this view are right, the wisdom they have in mind is something no mortal man has ever achieved. What you and I want to do, on the other hand, is not to look at such purely theoretical imaginative aims, but at the actual possibilities of everyday life. Our ancestors admitted Gaius Fabricius, Manius Curius, and Titus Cornelius into the category of wise men, but one could not claim that even they were wise by any such perfectionist standard as that. So much then for the name of wise man. It is an invidious and confusing definition anyway. The philosophers can keep it. All we shall ask them to concede is that those early Romans were good men, but even this they will refuse to admit because of their insistence that no one can be good unless they are wise. All we ourselves can do, therefore, is to get on as best we can with the aid of our own dull wits. So let us take some individual whose life and behavior have displayed proven loyalty, honesty, fairness, and generosity, a man of unflinching integrity, like those whose names I just mentioned, someone whose character does not contain a trace of covetous or violence or unscrupulousness, for such are the men who are generally described as good, and we are obliged to agree that they are entitled to the designation. They deserve it because, insofar as human beings can, they are acting in accordance with nature, which is the best possible guide to right living. For nature itself, I believe, was the creator of the ties that exist between one person and another. The closer the friendship, the more powerful the ties. Thus, they are stronger between fellow citizens than between foreigners, strong among relatives than among strangers. It is true that even between people who are foreign and strange to one another, nature encourages the development of a friendly feeling. But in such cases, the sentiment lacks a solid basis. Real friendship is even more potent than kinship, for the latter may exist without goodwill, whereas friendship can do no such thing. You can see its unique power when you consider this point. The bonds which nature has established to link one member of the human race with another are the innumerable but are innumerable, but friendship not only surpasses them all, but is something so choice and selective that its manifestations are normally restricted to two persons and two persons only, or at most extremely few. Friendship may be defined as a complete identity of feeling about all things in heaven and earth, an identity which is strengthened by mutual goodwill and affection. With the single exception of wisdom, I am inclined to regard it as the greatest of all the gifts that gods have bestowed upon mankind. Some people I know give preference to riches, or good health, or power, or public honors, and many rank sensuous pleasures highest of all. But feeling of that kind are something which any animal can experience, and the other items in that list too are thoroughly transient and uncertain. They do not hang on our own decisions at all, but are entirely at the mercy of fickle chance. Another school of thought believes that the supreme blessing is a moral goodness, and this is the right view. Moreover, this is the quality to which friendship owes its entire origin and character. Without goodness, it cannot even exist. Now let us follow the procedure we adopted before and define goodness according to the usage of our daily life and speech. All those ideal measurements and grandiose phrases which certain philosophers like to produce can be left on one side altogether. If men are generally regarded as good, let us accept them as such. Paulus and Cato and Gallus and the youngest Sergio and Fidelus and people like that. For all ordinary purposes, they amply meet the case. But as to other hypothetical personages who are not to be found anywhere in the world, we shall be well advised to forget all about them. Among individuals of the kind we are considering, the benefits that friendship offers among all that friendship offers almost defy description. They are so great. To begin with, how can life be worth living at all? To use the term of animus, unless it re- unless it reposes on the mutual goodwill of friends. It is the most satisfying experience in the world to have someone you can speak to as freely as your own self about any and every subject upon earth. If things are going well, you cannot possibly enjoy your prosperity to the full unless you have another person whose pleasure equals your own. Should things go wrong, your misfortunes will indeed be hard to bear without someone who suffers as badly as yourself, or even worse. And so friendship is quite different from all the other things in the world on which we are accustomed to set our hearts. For each and every one of those other objectives is specifically adapted to some single purpose: riches to be spent, power to secure obedience, public office to win praise, pleasure to enjoy oneself, good health to be free from pain and make full use of one's bodily endowments. Friendship, on the other hand, serves a great host of different purposes all at the same time. In whatever direction you turn, it still remains yours. No barrier can shut it. It can never be untimely. It can never be in the way. We need friendship all the time, just as much as we need the proverbial prime necessities of life: fire and water. I am not speaking of ordinary commonplace friendship, delightful and valuable though they can be. What I have in mind instead is the authentic, truly admirable sort of relationship, the sort that was embodied in those rare pairs of famous friends. Friendship then both adds a brighter glow to prosperity and relieves adversity by dividing and sharing the burden. And another of its very many and remarkable advantages is this: it is unique because of the bright rays of hope it projects into the future. It never allows the spirit of to falter or fall. When a man thinks of a true friend, he is looking at himself in the mirror. Even when a friend is absent, he is present all the same. However poor he is rich. However weak, he is strong. And may I attempt to convey an even more difficult concept? Even when he is dead, he is alive. For he is alive because of his friends still cherish him and remember him and long for him. This means that there is happiness even in his death. He ennobled the existences of those who are left behind. Take away the bond of kindly feeling from the world, and no house or city can stand. Even the fields will no longer be cultivated. If that sounds an exaggeration, consider the converse situation. Note the disasters that come from dissension and enmity. When there is internal hatred and division, no home or country in the world is strong enough to avoid destruction. That shows the value of the opposite situation: friendship. A certain learned man of Argentinum is said to have composed an inspired Greek poem in which he sang that all things in nature and the universe, whether stationary or moving, are united by friendship, and discord is what pulls them apart. Here, at least, is something said by a philosopher which no one can fail to appreciate and approve. That is why, when an instance arises of someone incurring or sharing danger on behalf of a friend, the act is welcomed by the rest of the world with superlative praise. For example, when my guest and friend Marcus Paracopius produced his recent play, one incident earned loud applause from the entire audience. This was the scene in which the king was confronted by two men and did not know which of them was Orestes. Pylades claimed that he was Orestes in order that he should be the one to be put to death in the place of his friend. The real Orestes, however, continued to insist on his own true identity. The entire crowd stood and cheered, although it was only a play. You can imagine how they would have felt if it had happened in real life. Here, when was a case of nature asserting its power, people were applauding in others what they had not been given an opportunity to achieve for themselves. Well, that is what I have to tell you about my views on friendship. If more remains to be said, and I have no doubt that it does, you had better ask the people who are used to conducting this sort of discussion. Varnius responds, "No, you are the person we want to ask. I have often had occasion to interrogate the professionals you mention, and it was pleasant enough to hear what they have to say, but your approach to the subject is quite different from theirs and wholly distinctive." Smola says in response that you would stress the same point even more, Varnius, if you had been at Servio's country house the other day when they were discussing state affairs. Claudius spoke magnificently in defense of the idea of justice, while Philus produced elaborate arguments to the contrary. Varnius responds, Claudius cannot have found it very difficult to stand up for justice, since no one displays the quality better than himself. Escobola, yes, and that means he ought to find it easy to speak in favor of friendship as well, since that too is something he has put into practice, which outstandingly loyalty, perseverance, and fairness, and we all know the great admiration he has earned by so doing. Lalius in response says that this is really coercion. Your tactful choice of weapons does not change the situation at all. Whatever may be said about your methods, they are violent, And when one's sons in law really press one for something, especially in a worthwhile cause, it is by no means easy to resist them. Indeed, I suppose one ought not to try. Now, I have thought a lot about friendship, and the more I think about it, the stronger my feelings is that the important question one has to decide is this: does the fact that people need friendship mean there is some weakness and deficiency in themselves? If so, this would mean that their main purpose in acquiring friends is to exchange services with another person. That is to say, to give and receive benefits which it would be beyond their own individual powers to grant or obtain on their own account. But surely this giving and receiving constitutes merely one feature and consequence of friendship. As for its origins, do these not rather lie in something altogether more primal and noble, something emanating more directly from the actual processes of nature? For goodwill is established by love quite independently of any calculation of profit, and it is from love, amor, that the word friendship, amacertia, is derived. It is true that you do often find people extracting advantages from someone by pretending they are their friends. The reason they are courting them so differentiately is because they are after some immediate benefit. But when there is a real friendship, no element of falsity or pretense can possibly enter into the matter. Friendship simply cannot help being genuine and sincere all through. And that is why one is obliged to conclude that it must be a product of nature rather than of any deficiency. It cannot, under any circumstances, be derived from any calculation of potential profit. It comes from a feeling of affection and inclination of the heart. The nature of this feeling can be deduced from the behavior of certain types of animal. These is that it is easy to see love their offspring up to a certain age and are loved by them in return. In the case of human beings, the same process is far more evident still. It is demonstrated by the mutual love existing between parents and their children, which nothing except the most outrageous crimes can possibly destroy. And the same sort of affection sometimes arises when we find a person whose habits and characters attract us so much that we look upon them as a shining light of goodness and excellence. Goodness exercises an altogether exceptional appeal and incentive towards the establishment of affection. People who possess this quality can inspire love in us even if we have never set eyes on them. When we think of Gaius Fabricus Marnius Curius, the hearts of all of us grow warm, although they lived long before our time. Equally, everyone detests Tarquinius Superbus and Spurius Carsius and Spurius Malleus, and when there were the two individuals against whom we fought for the supremacy of Italy, Varus and Hannibal. Towards the former we do not feel particularly hostile since he was a good man. The latter, on the other hand, will always be hated by Romans because he is cruelty. Goodness then is such a powerful thing that we love it even when people we have never seen, and more remarkable still, even in those who have been our enemies in war. Since that is the situation, it is scarcely surprising that our spirits are stirred when we believe we discern virtue and excellence in people who are really available for us to form an intimate association with. These feelings are naturally intensified if we receive kind treatment from someone, for that means they like us. Another source of friendly feeling is to see a lot of someone in one's daily life, Add all these factors to the original friendly impulse, and the result will be a truly splendid and substantial glow of affection. Anyone of the opinion that this feeling emanates from mere inadequacy and is entirely concerned with getting hold of someone who will provide us with the things that we should like to get is surely assigning friendship altogether too humble and ignoble in origin. For it really cannot just be the child of poverty and destitution. If it were, the less confidence a man felt in himself, the better his qualifications for friendship would have to be regarded. But that is far from the being the case. Indeed, the contrary is true. The more confidence a person feels in themselves, the stronger his equipment of moral and intellectual gifts will be. And although these are the qualities that relieve them of dependence upon others and make them feel completely self sufficient, they will actually strengthen the capacity for making and keeping friends. Consider Avocados, for example. Did he need me? Of course he did not. Not for that matter did I need him. I was attached to him because I admired his fine qualities, and he returned my feeling because he also on his side appeared not to have formed too bad an opinion of my own character. And as we got to know one another, our mutual affection grew. Certainly, the association did bring practical advantages and on a considerable scale, but in the formation of our friendship, no expectations of such a kind played even the slightest part. When a man shows kindness and generosity, their motive in doing so is not just to exact repayment. We do not hire out our favors and charge interest for them. We behave kindly because that is the natural thing to do. The reason why we count friendship as a blessing is not because we are hoping for a material return. It is because the union is quite enough profit in itself. These views will be vigorously repudiated by anyone who prefers to measure everything in animal like terms of pleasure. That is not surprising. For when people are prepared to debase their whole standard of thinking to such a lowly and degraded level as that, any kind of lofty vision reaching up to the skies is obviously beyond their powers. So let us not bother to think about that category of individual at all. We shall do better, I repeat, to conclude that our offering of attachment and affection towards our fellow human being represents a wholly natural phenomenon, and that they are stimulated by evidence of superior character in the other person. And so, when two people have formed a taste for such qualities, this common inclination draws them together and unites them with one another. Next, association with the object of their love causes them to enjoy the company and character of the person in question, to reciprocate his devotion, and to desire to perform services on behalf without demanding any for oneself in return. Two people in such a situation will become rivals, will compete with one another in the noblest of ways. That is how we can get the most out of a friendship. The fact that it has been founded on the processes of nature and does not rely on human defects will make it all the sounder and more genuine. If an advantage were what kept friendships together, the removal of the advantage would mean that the friendship itself would cease to exist. But since instead nature is the originator and since nature is everlasting, authentic friendships is permanent too. That then is what I think about how friendships come into being. Do you want to make any comments? Phineas responds, no, Larius, do please go on, and since Gattarola is younger than myself, I am entitled to speak for him as well. And so, on both of our accounts, I ask you to continue. Scavola, Phineas is quite correct. Larius, please let us hear everything else you have to say to us. Larius continues. In that case, my dear friends, I shall tell you the points that used to come up on the numerous occasions when I was discussing this subject with Scipio. He maintained that it was the most difficult thing in the world for a friendship to last until the very end of life. Either it ceases to be mutually advantageous or people's political views change and affect their relations with one another. And another thing that changes, he added, is a person's character. It gets altered by the blows of misfortune or the increasing burdens of age. He illustrated this point by comparing what happens to people in the early years of their lives. When boys discard the dress of childhood, at the same time they often throw off their friendships, however strong these may have been before. Or else, even if they manage to maintain these associations into early manhood, they frequently break them off at that point, because the two youths then find themselves competing for a wife or some other acquisition, which can only go to one or the other partner, but cannot go to both at the same time. Indeed, even if their friendship does succeed in lasting longer, it is likely to be ruined as soon as rivalry for public office begins. Among the majority of the population, on the other hand, friendship's worst destroyer is greed for money. But in men at the top, competitive ambition for jobs and distinctions is what causes the deadliest enmities, even between those who have been the most intimate friends hitherto. Scipio also expressed the view that many friendships are violently and often quite rightly broken when one party has asked the other to do something that is wrong, perhaps to help him gratify his vices or to take part in some other equally deplorable act. When the demand, however, justifiably is rejected, the person who has been rebuffed claims that the law of friendship have been flouted, and those other individuals who would be prepared to ask anything of a friend take the opportunity to hint that even if they themselves are importunate, this is only a sign that they would be prepared to do anything whatsoever for a friend's sake. The recriminations which go on and on after an incident of this kind are very often apt to put a stop to friendships, and indeed they produce lasting enmities. Such, said Scipio, are the varied and perilous fates which hang over the relations between friends. To avoid every one of them requires the greatest wisdom, and a good deal of luck as well. Evidently, then, it is necessary to consider just how far a man ought to be ready to go on behalf of his friend. If Corollius, for example, had friends, was it their duty to stay at his side when he took up arms against his own country? Or should the friends of Spurius, Carsius, or Marius have supported them in their attempts to become tyrants of Rome? As for Tiberius Gracchus, when he was disrupting the government, he saw how Quintus Tubero and other friends of his own age completely abandoned him. On the other hand, Gaius Ambrosius of Cumae, who enjoyed the hospitality of your family, Scaevola, came to me to plead for leniency. I was an adviser of the consuls Latinus and Rupilius. He justified this request on the grounds of his devotion to Tiberius Gracchus. He himself thought so highly of Gracchus, said Ambrosius, that he felt obliged to do whatever his friend required. Even I asked if Gracchus had told you to set fire to the Capitol. He would never have wanted any such thing, but if he had wanted it, I should have obeyed. What an abominable thing to say! And heaven knows Brosius acted in accordance with his profession, and even worse. Not content with merely following Gracchus' outrageous schemes, he actually directed them. He was not just his comrade, but took the lead in the whole frenzied enterprise. And when this lunacy resulted in the establishment of a court inquiry, Blosius took fright and fled to the province of Asia, where he joined the enemies of our country and paid a heavy and richly deserved penalty for the crimes he had committed against the Roman state. To claim, then, that one did wrong for the sake of a friend is no excuse. After all, what had originally brought the two of you together was mutual belief in each other's goodness. So if subsequently you stop being good, it's hard to see how the friendship can continue. If we decided it was right either to grant our friends everything they wanted or to extract from them everything we wanted ourselves, this could only be harmless if we were persons of supreme and flawless wisdom. But the friends I now have in mind are the ones whom we ourselves actually see before our eyes and come across, or whom we at least know from heavy hearsay. Men, that is to say, who belong to the realities of everyday life. For after all, those are the people we are obliged to take our models from. Perfect wisdom, of course, they have not attained, though we are entitled to select those who approach that ideal most closely. Thus, we see, for example, or rather, we have learned from our fathers that Amelius Parpus enjoyed a great friendship with Gaius Fabricus, that they were twice colleagues in the consulship, and that they served together as censors. Manius Curius and Tiberius Corsicanius, too, according to tradition, very were very closely associated, not only with the two I have just mentioned, but with each other as well. Now, when we think of men of that sort of caliber, it is surely quite impossible for us to suspect that any of them could possibly have asked a friend for anything conflicting with his honor, or with an oath he had taken, or with the interests of the nation, and if they themselves had received such demands, to suggest in the case of persons like these that the demands would have met with refusal is so obvious as not to be worth mentioning, for they were all men of the utmost integrity who would have regarded it as equally wrong to have granted such a request if they had received it, or to have made the request themselves. Tiberius Gracchus, on the other hand, does not come into this category. He was perfectly well able to find people prepared to pursue his designs. Men such as Gaius Carbo and Gaius Cardo, and his own brother Gaius Gracchus too, although he was by no means enthusiastic at the time, has become a fanatical supporter of the same policy now. So this is the rule we must lay down between friends. Do not ask for anything that is wrong, and if you are asked for such a thing, turn the application down. To excuse oneself for committing a misdemeanor on the grounds that it was done for the sake of a friend is entirely unacceptable. Such an excuse is no justification for any offense whatever, and least of all for offenses against our country. For as both of you, Farnius and Scavola, are well aware, our present situation requires us to keep the sharpest lookout for national crisis that may be impending. The political traditions established by former generations of Romans have already been deflected quite strongly off their track and course. Tiberius Gracchus tried to give himself the power of a king. In fact, for a few months he was virtually king. The people of Rome had never heard or seen anything like it before. Moreover, even after he was dead, his friends and relatives continued along the path on which he had led the way. And what they did to Publius Servio, it brings tears to my eyes, even to mention. As for Carbo, we have put up with him as best as we can, because, after all, his leader, Tiberius Gracchus, got his punishment, and not so long ago. But what is to be expected when Gaius Gracchus becomes tribune in his turn, I shall not care to forecast. The trouble seeps down further every day, and once this sort of deterioration has started, it gains momentum rapidly, and soon there is a headlong rush to disaster. And you can see how the decisions about the ballot taken even before the Gracan disturbances ever began. First the Gabanian law, and then 2 years later the Cassian law, have had their ruinous consequences. As I see it, the Assembly has now broken completely with the Senate, and major policy is settled by the whim of the masses. What we shall find before long is the more people understand how to become agitators than understand how to stop them. The relevance of these happenings to our present discussion is this: no one goes on for such activities unless he has found associates. So every right thinking man has to get this into their mind. If inadvertently by any chance they should have contrived to involve themselves in friendships of such an extremely perilous nature, he must under no circumstances let them debar him from abandoning any of these friends. Once the man in question has committed some treasonable offense, Wrongdoers have to be punished, and the punishment will be just as severe for the followers as leaders. Let Themistocles be an object lesson. He was the most famous and powerful man in the whole of Greece, and by leading his fellow countrymen in the Persian War, he had saved them all from slavery. Subsequently, however, he became unpopular and was driven into exile. He should have endured what his ungrateful compatriots were doing to him, unfair though it was, but that he refused to do. Instead, as he acted as Coriolanus had acted here at Rome 20 years earlier, both these individuals rose against their own compatriots. They were unable, however, to find anyone to help them, and so each in turn took their own life. An alliance with malefactors, which is what this Democles and Carolinus had become, could not be excused by any plea of friendship. On the contrary, such an association has to be penalized with the greatest severity, so that no one may be misguided enough to imagine that they would be right to support a friend who is making war upon his own country. And yet, the way matters are going now at Rome, I am very much afraid that this is just the sort of thing which is likely to happen here again and again one of these days. Already at this very moment, the existing state of the Republic fills me with the deepest anxiety, but I also feel just as anxious, terribly anxious, about its fortunes in the future when I am dead and gone. So, among the rules of friendship, this ought to come first of all. Never ask your friends for anything that is not right, and never do anything for them yourself unless it is right. But then do it without even waiting to be asked. Always be ready to help, never hang back. Offer advice too, willingly and without hesitation, just as you yourself, if you have a friend whose advice is good, should always pay great attention to what he says. But when you yourself are the advisor, use your influence as a friend to speak frankly and even if the occasion demands, severely. And if you are the recipient of equally stern advice, listen to it and act as you are advised. I've heard of some strange views held in Greece by individuals who are respected over there as wise men. I understand, though, this sort of character is generally inclined to be over subtle. I refer to suggestions from certain quarters that intimate friendships ought not to be indulged in at all, so that no one will have the slightest need to trouble himself with any other person at all. Everyone, according to this hypothesis, has more than enough worries of their own, and it is tiresome to get too deeply involved in those of others. The best thing, therefore, is to keep the reins of friendship as loose as you can, and then you can tighten them or relax them further as you please. For the essence of a happy life, the argument continues, is freedom from care, which no one can achieve if they have the worries of a lot of his fellow citizens on his hands. There is also, I am told, another view which is even more heartless. I briefly touched on it just now. This is the assertion that friendship should be cultivated not for the sake of kindly and affectionate feeling at all, but solely for purposes of mutual utility. This would mean that the people who would get the most out of friendship would be those whose wills bodies are the weakest. Helpless women would need its protection more than men, the poor more than the rich, the unfortunate more than those who are considered fortunate. What a peculiar philosophy. People who propound this sort of theory seem to me to be doing nothing less than tearing the same sun out of the heavens. for they are, in fact, depriving life of friendship, which is the noblest and most delightful of all the gifts the gods have ever given to mankind. And in any case, what does such freedom from care really mean? Superficially, it looks attractive, but in reality, there are many circumstances in which this is the very last thing we want, for there could, in fact, be nothing more misguided than to refuse to perform a good act, or having embarked on it, to stop in the middle, merely in order to keep out of trouble. Certainly, we may succeed in avoiding trouble, but at that same time, we shall be avoiding decent behavior, because that is always bound to produce a certain amount of trouble because of its determination to eliminate everything that is incompatible with itself. When kindness, for example, rejects unkindness, self control spurns license, courage throws out cowardice. For obviously, the people who hate injustice more than anyone else are the just. The keenest opponents of cowardice are the brave. Those most hostile to shameful behavior are the virtuous. Naturally, every person whose mind works in the right way welcomes what is good and grieves what is bad. In other words, a wise man cannot possibly escape having any feelings of distress whatsoever unless every trace of humanity has first been rooted out from his heart. Consequently, to remove friendships from our lives just because it might bring us worries would be the biggest possible mistake. If we eliminate all human emotions, there is no difference left. I will not say between men and animals, because animals have their feelings, but even between men and tree trunks, or stones, or any other inanimate object you like to mention. And to anyone who maintains that the way to be good is to possess the hardness of iron, we should turn a deaf ear. In many aspects of life, and particularly in matters of friendship, goodness is a sensitive and pliable thing. It is like a liquid reacting to heat and cold. When our friends are doing well, it expands with them, and when their affairs go badly, it shrinks in sympathy. Friendship, as I have just admitted, will inevitably involve distress, and quite often at that. But we must not let this prospect banish friendship out of the lives altogether, any more than we would be justified in rejecting moral standards because they, too, entail worries and troubles. Friendships, I repeat, are formed when an exemplar of shining goodness makes itself manifest, and when some congenial spirit feels the desire to fasten on to this model, then the result will be affection. And if we allow ourselves, as we do, to be pleased by a whole host of meaningless things such as public office and fame and fine architecture and rich clothing and personal adornment, it would be ridiculous when we encounter a noble living being who possesses a capacity for loving, not to be wholly delighted with what we have found, and to reciprocate his affection. Certainly, it is very agreeable indeed to be able to perform the practical tasks of repaying kindness and exchanging friendly services, but it still remains true that the greatest of all possible incentives to friendship is congeniality of temperament. This means that a good man is attracted by other good men. He wants to annex them for themselves. This is almost like an ordinance of nature, as if the two of them were bound together by ties of blood, for nature has greedy urge towards everything that is in conformity with itself. That Farnius and Scarbola is a cognate and evident reason, in my opinion, why good men feel for one another the kindly inclinations which nature has made the very wellspring of friendship. And these noble feelings are found in perfectly ordinary people. There's nothing inhuman or uncooperative or standoffish about goodness. It protects whole nations and looks after them extremely well, which it could certainly never do if it disdained the affectionate feelings of a man in the street. Anyone who wants to allege that a friendship is formed for the sake of advantage seems to me to be doing away with the most attractive things which an association can offer. What we enjoy in a friend is not the profit we derive from them, but the affection. Any practical benefit that goes with this affection only gives satisfaction when it is the product of a warm heart. It is quite untrue to say that people only form friendships because there is some deficiency in themselves. On the contrary, the most generous and liberal friends are those who have the very least need of anyone else, because they themselves already possess wealth and power and above all goodness, which is the strongest resource a man can command. And in any case, perhaps it is rather frustrating if one's friends do not lack anything at all. If Scipio, for example, in his civil and military occupations had never needed any advice or assistance from myself, it would have meant that I had no opportunity to show how fond of him I was. However, friendship does not develop out of advantage. The process works the other way around. If people whose lives are just constant wallowings in self indulgence want to discuss friendship, let us not pay them the slightest attention. They do not understand the subject, either in practice or theory, because heaven knows surely we all ought to know that there is not a man upon the whole earth who would want to live surrounded by unlimited wealth and affluence if the price he had to pay was to renounce both loving and being loved. That is how a tyrant lives, without mutual trust, without affection, without any assurance of enduring goodwill. In such a life, suspicion and anxiety reign everywhere, and friendship has no place. For one can love the person he fears, or the person he believes himself to be feared by. Tyrants are courted naturally, but the courting of insincere, and it only lasts for a time. When these despots fall, as they normally do, it becomes very evident how short of friends they have been. Tradition reports that Trachinius Superbus made his point as he went into exile. At last he said, "It is clear to me which of my friends are true and which are false, now that I am no longer in a position to pay them back." Tarquinius, however, was an arrogant bully, and I doubt if he was able to have any friends at all. His character must surely have made this impossible, and in any case, friendships are generally ruled out when there is an excess of resources and power. Fortune is not only blind herself, but blinds the people she has embraced. They become puffed up with disagreeable insolence, and there is nothing more insufferable than a fool whom fortune has blessed. You can see how military command and power and success transform people who had been decent enough before and cause them to discard their old friendships in favor of new ones. When a man is overflowing with wealth and goods and all kinds of abundance, and has got hold of everything that money can buy, horses, slaves, splendid clothes, expensive plate, he will be very foolish if he fails to add friends to that list, since they are the finest equipment that life can offer. Besides, when it is material property that people are acquiring, they have no idea who is really going to benefit from these goods in the end. They cannot guess on whose behalf ultimately they have gone to all this bother, for possessions of this kind get passed on. They go on to the next man whose turn it is to rise to the top. Friendship, on the other hand, remains a firm and durable asset. Indeed, even if a man does manage to keep his hands on fortune's transitory gifts, his life will still remain unhappy if it is empty and devoid of friends. So much then for this side of the matter. It remains to make up our minds what limits and restrictions ought to be set to our affection for a friend. I know for three separate answers to this question, and I do not approve of any of them. The first opinion is that our feeling for our friends should be identical with our feeling for our own selves. The second is that our goodwill towards friends should correspond in every respect to their own attitude towards us. Third point of view is that the value we attach to our friends should be exactly the same as the value they attach to themselves. Now, as I said, I disagree with every one of these pronouncements. The first of them, suggesting that a man should be the same feeling for his friends as he has for himself, is entirely wrong. We do a great many things for our friends that we should never dream of doing for ourselves. We are prepared on their behalf to ask and even beg favors from the most inferior individuals. We are also ready to attack other people in savage, relentless terms, which would be odious if we were launching these onslaughts in our own interests, but are entirely respectable if their motive is to help a friend. And decent men are often willing to throw away or let themselves be deprived of substantial gain with the deliberate intentions that the profit should go to their friends instead of themselves. The second attitude, which restricts friendships to an equal interchange of services and feelings, reduces it to a too mean and narrow calculation of payments and receipts meticulously balanced. Friendships to me is something altogether richer and more abundant. It is not going to keep a close watch on whether it pays out more than it receives. Fears that something may slip over the slide or fall on the ground or overflow the proper measure of friendship are completely out of place. But the third limitation is the worst of all. This is the theory that a man's friends ought to estimate him at his own valuation of himself. A lot of people happen to be too humble about themselves or too pessimistic about the possibility of self betterment. In such cases, it is by no means the duty of a friend to accept the other man's estimate of himself. What we ought to do, on the contrary, is to exert every effort to increase his friend's self confidence and lead him towards a more hopeful and optimistic opinion of his own capabilities. Evidently, then, these are all unacceptable definitions of friendship, and we must think of something else. But first, I must mention one other standpoint which Scipio used to regard with particular distaste. This was the belief that we ought to love as if we are one day going to hate. Scipio said he regarded this idea as totally incompatible with true friendship. He refused to credit the generally accepted belief that the maxim was attributable to Bias, who was considered to be one of the seven wisest men. Scipio preferred instead to suppose that the utterance had emanated from some degraded character, perhaps an unscrupulous politician who was looking at everything in terms of his own career. For how could you possibly form a friendship with a man whom you foresaw all the time as a future enemy? If that were really your approach, you would inevitably find yourself hoping and praying that your friend would do wrong on every possible occasion. And if, on the contrary, he acted creditably and fared well, you would be obliged to feel pain, distress, and envy. So, whoever it may be who originally made this statement, its effect is assuredly to consign friendship to destruction. The right view, in fact, is the exact opposite. We ought to have it instilled in us that we must never make a friend whom we might someday come to hate. And if Scipio maintained we prove mistaken in our choice of a friend, we have just got to put up with it. Under no circumstances must we look for an occasion to convert that relationship into a hostile one. So we still have not found the right way to define friendship. My suggestion is this: when two men of sound character are friends, they should unreservedly share all their concerns and aims with one another. Indeed, even if by some chance a friend of ours possessed ambitions which, while not entirely laudable, nevertheless needed our assistance, since either his life or his reputation were at stake, then we should have some justification in turning aside from the path of strict moral rectitude, short, that is to say, of doing something absolutely disgraceful, since there are limits beyond which friendship could not excusably go. I mention a danger to the man's reputation as well as his life, because one is entitled to consider this side of things and recollect that in a public career the goodwill of one's fellow countrymen is an exceedingly powerful weapon. Certainly, to acquire such goodwill by by flattery would be wrong, but it is also entirely possible to gain popularity without the slightest departure from decent moral standards. But let me get back to Scipio, since he had a lot to say on this subject. He used to complain, for example, that people are prepared to take more trouble about everything else in the world than about friendship. Everyone has an idea how many goats and sheep he owns, but nobody can say how many friends they possess, and an immense amount of care is devoted to acquiring the cattle, but none, Scipio believed, to choosing friends. And no one has at his disposal any definite signs or criteria for determining which candidate satisfies the necessary conditions for friendship and which does not. The friends we select ought to be sound and stable and reliable, but such people are distinctly scarce, and besides, it is extremely difficult to pick them except by practical experience. And the problem is that this experience can only be acquired after the friendship has actually begun. That is to say, the friendship comes first, and the material for estimating its desirability only becomes accessible later on. It is impossible to try one's friend out in advance. Any sensible person then will behave like a charioteer, applying the reins to his team, and will check the vigorous impulses of their affections. In this way, he will be able, to some extent at least, to subject their friends to the same sort of preliminary testing operation that men apply to their horses. For example, one fault which may turn up in one friend is unreliability in small money matters, whereas another sort of person would never succumb to corruption by a trivial sum, but shows himself a bad friend as soon as more imposing amounts are involved. There are some people, it is true, who would agree that it is always sordid to rate financial considerations above friendship, but we should be hard to put it to find anyone at all who would not be prepared to sacrifice a friend to his political or military career. Place the lucrative attractions of office on one side and the claims of friendships on the other, and far too often the former will easily come first, for human nature is too weak to refrain from coveting power. And indeed, even when a person has sunk so low as to abandon his friends in the effort to become powerful, he will still somehow manage to convince himself that a veil will be drawn over the defection, because it was prompted by such an irresistible motive. Consequently, men engaged in politics and the business of the state discover that true friendships are extremely hard to come by. For where on earth are you going to find anybody who will be keener to advance his friend's career than his own? Besides, if someone in public life gets into difficulties, people find it deeply disagreeable and painful to remain friends with them. Those who are prepared to step down and join them in their troubles are very few indeed. As Ennius rightly said, a friend in need is a friend indeed. There are two opposite charges on which most men stand convicted of fickleness and unreliability. When they are doing well, they forget their friends, and when a friend is in difficulties, they desert him. Anyone who proves himself a serious, reliable, and steadfast friend in both these sets of circumstances clearly belongs to an extremely rare and indeed almost superhuman class of person. The foundation of this reliable steadfastness which we look for in friendships is trust. Trust and friendship go together. We require our chosen friend to be straightforward and companionable and congenial. In other words, we hope that they will have the same interests as ourselves, and that is what makes for trust. No one with a devious or tortuous disposition inspires confidence, and no one who fails to share their own concerns, who lacks sympathy with them, can really be trustworthy or reliable as a friend. I must add one further requirement too. A friend will not enjoy criticizing you. And what is more, when other people criticize you, he will refuse to listen. Both these points are extremely relevant to this question of reliability, all of which is to repeat what I asserted at the beginning. Only good men have the capacity to be good friends. And so, when good men, which means the same as wise men, enter into a friendship, they conduct it according to two rules. First, there must not be the slightest element of pretense or hypocrisy. Any decent person would rather hate openly than conceal his true thoughts behind an insincere expression. And not only if there is criticism of his friend, he will take no notice, but he himself will never believe or entertain the slightest suspicion that the other person has done wrong. Secondly, a friend should be pleasant in conversation and manner, since these are things which add spice to any relationship. To be solemn and austere on all occasions may be impressive, but friendship ought to be something freer and more relaxed and more agreeable, paying greater attention to pleasant and amiable behavior. At this point, there arises a bit of a problem. Should new friends, assuming they deserve the designation, sometimes be ranked above old ones, in the same way as we prefer young horses to old? However, this is not a question which any human being really ought to ask. There are some things we can easily have too much of, but friendships is not one of them. The older it is, the better it ought to have become, like a wine that has improved with age. There is truth in the saying that men must eat many a peck of salt together before they can know what friendship really means. I'm not saying that new friendships are to be despised on the assumption that they really offer a prospect of bearing fruit, like blades of corn that fulfill their promise at the harvest, yet the old friendships must still keep their place, for length of time and familiarity are by no means negligible factors. To go back to horses for a moment, other things being equal, everyone would prefer to use the mount that they know best rather than an untrained and unfamiliar one. Indeed, habit applies equally strongly to our attitudes even towards inanimate objects. A place in which we have spent a long time, for example, arouses our affection, however rocky and wild it may be. A particularly important point between one friend and another is this: the superior must place themselves on an equality with their inferior. It often happens that one man stands out among the others, as Scipio stood out in what you might call our group. All the same, he never had the slightest desire to place himself above Filius or Rubrius or Murmurius, or even his friends of lower rank. And his brother Quintus Maximus, a distinguished man, but by no means Scipio's equal, actually received deference from him. because Quantus was the older of the two. Indeed, Scipio's greatest wish was that all his friends should gain, not lose, in stature because of their association with himself. And that is the lead which everyone should follow. If an individual happens to be superior in character or intellectual qualities or worldly wealth, it is their duty to pass on this advantage to their kinsmen and friends, thus making sure that the people who are closest to them have their share. If, for instance, his parents were to humble them, or if his parents were of humble birth, it is up to them to improve their stat. It is up to him to improve his status and social position, and if his relatives are his inferiors in ability or wealth, he should provide them with material assistance. It is something like the situation in the Middle when someone has been obliged for a time to live menial existence because his origin and lineage were unknown. Finally, he is discovered and recognized to be the son of a god or a king, but still he remains affectionate for the shepherds whom he believed for so many years to be his parents. And when there is an important personage in real life, when his humble parents are authentic parents, his feelings for them ought to be a great deal stronger still. For whatever gifts of mind and character we may possess, we only reap their finest fruits when we are able to share them with our nearest and dearest friends. So much then for the necessity that in any relationship with friends or kinsmen, the stronger partner must place himself of an equal footing with the weaker, and the latter on their side ought not to be distressed because the other one has surpasses them in talents or possessions or rank. In reality, when such a situation arises, the weaker parties frequently indulge in complaints and reproaches. This is particularly apt to happen when they believe they can claim to have performed some friendly service to the other person, involving a certain amount of exertion. But the sort of individual who makes a grievance out of what they have done to help someone is thoroughly tedious. Certainly, the man for whose sake the services have been performed ought to remember them, but the individual who performed them would do better to keep his mouth shut. To sum up, then, not only should the superior partner in a friendship reduce themselves to the level of their friend, though they sure also under an obligation to do everything they can do to lift their friend to his own level. Some people make friendships very unpleasant because they are so ready to believe that they have been slighted. However, the characters who adopt this attitude are usually those who have strong suspicion that they deserve the slight. It is as well as disabuse them, as well to disabuse them, and not merely to by disclaimers either, but by practical demonstrations. That is to say, you ought to give each of your friends just as much assistance as you have the capacity to provide, and as the object of your affection and assistance is capable of receiving, for however distinguished you may be, it would be beyond your powers to promote every one of your friends to the highest post in the state. Scipio, for example, was able to give Robulius made consul, but then for his brother Lucius he could not manage it. And indeed, even if you did possess the power to give your friend everything you wanted him to have, it would still be incumbent on you to consider how far his capabilities extended. Generally speaking, decisions about friendships should be taken after we have reached full physical and intellectual maturity. Suppose that a person was keen on hunting and ball games as a boy. It's not to be expected that when he grows up, he'll continue to associate with individuals whom, in those early days, had shared his interests. If that was the principle we adopted, our nurses and the slaves who took us to school would have a claim on the major part of our goodwill because they were the first human beings we ever knew. We must not drop them, of course, but our relationships with them will now have to be looked at a different light. Friendships formed before one grows up cannot possibly be stable or permanent. For young people's personalities change, and their tastes change with them, and altered tastes are what bring friendships to an end. The reason why bad men cannot be friends with good men and good men with bad men is because of the enormous gulf of character and tastes that yawns between them. And there is another useful rule: do not let your good intentions towards a friend become it so exaggerated that by mistake you actually damage their major interests instead of helping them. This happens all too often. For example, to borrow another illustration from mythology, if Neoptolemus had listened to Lycomedes, who had brought him up, he would have never have taken Troy, since the old man had carefully endeavored to prevent him from leaving home. Important business often makes it necessary for friends to part, and anyone who tries to prevent this because the separation will cause him unhappiness is displaying a weak, soft character and behaving unreasonably as a friend. All the same time, you have got to consider how much you are going to demand of your friend and how much you yourself are going to give him. And now I must leave the relationships between men to whom some degree of wisdom may be attributed, because I want to descend to associations of a more everyday character. Breaking off a friendship can amount to disaster, though the step may well be unavoidable all the same. It is possible for a person's faults on occasion to erupt unpleasantly on top of their friends, either directly or with a third party as the case. When this occurs, the friendship needs to be brought to an end, not suddenly, but by a gradual process of elimination. Or as I once heard Cato put it to the point, it is better to unstitch the union than to tear it apart, unless that is to say there has been some outburst of intolerable wrongdoing, in which case the only proper and honorable course, indeed the only practical course, will be immediate withdrawal and disassociation. If, on the other hand, as more frequently happens, there has merely been a shift in attitude and interest or a divergence of political views, for as I said, I am now talking about ordinary relationships here, then something must be done to make it clear that what has happened is just a termination of friendship and not a declaration of war. For if a man has been your friend, it is the most discreditable thing in the world to let them become your enemy. As you both know, Scipio stopped being a friend of Quintus Pompeius on my own account. Scipio was also compelled, again by a political difference, to become estranged from my colleague Quintus Metellus. In each instance, he acted with dignity and restraint, and refused to allow his displeasure to deteriorate into bitterness. Our first duty then is to ensure that if possible our friendship shall contain no rifts, but if these nevertheless occur, it is our duty to make it look as though the associations have just burnt themselves out and not been forcibly smothered. Under no circumstances must friendships be allowed to deteriorate into serious hostility, which would inevitably mean that one becomes the target for insulting, abusive criticism. And yet, even this hostile comment, provided it does not become absolutely intolerable, may have to be endured, for the friendship that once used to exist is still entitled to this degree of respect. You ought to be readier to suffer offense than to cause it. Against all these faults and troubles, there is only one possible precaution and safeguard. That is, do not be too quick to form an attachment. Make quite sure first that you are not attaching yourself to someone who does not deserve the association. The people who merit your friendship are those who genuinely possess some characteristic capable of inspiring devotion. Such men are rare, for of course it is the hardest thing in the world to find anything in any field that is altogether perfect of its kind. Most people are not prepared in their daily lives to accept that anything can be good unless it has a source of profit. They choose their best friends as they choose their cattle, lavishing the greatest affection where they hope for the most lucrative results. But if this is what they are going to do, they will miss the finest and most natural sort of friendship. I mean the sort which is desirable for its own sake and for itself. Such people deprive themselves of the opportunity to experience for themselves how powerful, how wonderful, and how all embracing this kind of relationship can be. Think of the love any person feels for his own self. Why do they engage in all this self love? Not from any hope of profit, but simply because it is in the nature of the things that they should do so. Now, this is just the sort of feeling that has to be transferred to friendship. There's no other way to find a real friend. Birds and fishes and beasts of the field, tame and wild, every living being loves itself. The feeling is inborn in every creature, and inborn too is the need to find other creatures of the same species onto which they can fasten themselves. The urge that impels them to do so bears some resemblance to human love, and indeed human nature engenders the same pair of feelings with a special degree of intensity, for they too love themselves and they too search for a partner whose personality they can unite so utterly with their own that the two are almost transformed into one. Perversely, not to say shamelessly, most people want to have the sort of friend they cannot be themselves. They expect their friends to provide what they themselves are incapable of supplying. However, the ideal requirement for such a relationship, next to being a good person yourself, is quite the opposite. It's to find someone not difficult from oneself. It's to find someone not different from oneself, but the same. That is the best guarantee of the permanence I have been discussing. And those two are the circumstances in which men united by mutual sympathy can learn to master the passions to which other men are slaves. They will take pleasure in their fairness and justice, and there is nothing they will not do for one another. They will be incapable of asking their partner for anything that is not right and good. And besides loving and cherishing each other, they will also feel mutual respect. Remove respect from friendship, and you will have taken away the most splendid ornament it possesses. People who believe friendship gives a good opportunity for all sorts of laxity and crime are making a dangerous mistake. That is not why nature gave us this blessing. She did not give it in order to pander to our vices, but to help us behave decently. For the highest standards of behavior are impossible to realize on one's own. Union with someone else, companionship, are the only things that can ensure them. Such an association, whether you are speaking of today or of the past or of any epoch in the future, ranks as the finest and most glorious of all possible connections, embodying the highest good that nature has to offer. For friendships of such a kind embrace everything worth pursuing by mankind, goodness and fame, and peace of mind and satisfaction, the things which make life happy when we have them, whereas without them there can be no question of happiness at all. The happiness is the summit of our best ambitions, but if we are to get it, we shall have to concentrate on raising our behaviors to the very highest standard that morality can achieve. If we fail to do this, we can achieve neither friendship nor, for that matter, any other worthwhile objective. Anyone who ignores these standards but imagines that they have friends all the same will discover his mistake as soon as some serious emergency obliges them to put their friendship to the test. Consequently, my warning needs to be repeated again and again. Become devoted to your friend only after you have tried them out. Do not first become devoted and then try them out. There is nothing which causes people to display worse carelessness and pay graver penalties than their selection and acquisition of friends. We are apt to plan too late for something that is already in the past. We start doing what has already been done, just the thing that the old proverb tells us to avoid, and then very often after we have become involved with someone by meeting them every day or doing each other good turns all at once, right in the middle of our friendship, some cause of offense arises and we break the whole thing off. Negligence of this magnitude in so utterly vital a matter is singularity deplorable. For after all, the only thing in the whole of human life which everyone without exception agrees to be worthwhile is friendship. Even moral goodness is disparaged by a lot of people who call itself advertisement and display, and quite a number of people look down on riches because they themselves happen to need very little and are content with meager food and a modest way of life. Or then again, if you consider the attractions of an important political career, although some men, it is true, are consumed with such ambitions, a lot of others contemptuously regard it as something utterly empty and futile. The same applies to anything else you like to mention. Whatever it may be, its admirers will be matched by many others who think nothing of it at all. Yet friendship is something which inspires the same opinion in everybody. Politicians, scholars who devote themselves to study and learning, businessmen who stick to their own affairs and keep out of public life, even those individuals who devote themselves entirely to the pleasures of the flesh, feel the same. All these categories of person, if they feel the slightest aspirations towards a decent human existence, believe that without friendship, life does not deserve the name. Somehow or other, friendship inserts itself into all our existences, however we choose to live. There's no escaping it. Picture someone who is by nature so savage and forbidding that he shuns and detests the company of his fellow man. Tradition tells us that there once lived just such an individual at Athens called Timon, and yet even that sort of character would not be able to resist making contact with some other person, for at least he could not help wanting to find a target for his venomous bitterness. You can appreciate what I mean if you imagine the following situation. Suppose that some divine being lifted us out of the crowded human society in which we live and planted us in some spot where nobody lived at all. Suppose, furthermore, that he supplied us with an abundance of every material provision which we could conceivably require, but made it utterly impossible for us to look upon any other human being. To put up with life on those terms would be beyond anyone's powers, even if he were made of iron. If you are lonely, every pleasure loses its savor. There was a famous saying which some sage always had on his lips: Artas and tarantum, I think it was. I have heard it repeated by old men at Rome, and they in turn had heard it from their seniors. The saying went like this: if a man ascended into heaven and gazed upon the whole workings of the universe and the beauty of all the stars, the marvelous sight would give him no joy if he had to keep it to himself. And yet, if only there had been someone to describe the spectacle to, it would have filled him with delight. Nature abhors solitude and always demands that everything should have some support to rely upon. For any human being, the best support of all is a good friend. Nature provides many a sign to let us know what she wants and seeks and demands, and yet somehow the other we turn a deaf ear and fail to listen to her warnings. The maintenance of a friendship is a varied and complex process, offering many perilous opportunities for suspicion and offense. If one is wise, they will sometimes contrive to avoid these unpleasant occurrences and will sometimes manage to make light of them. At other times, they just have to put up with them. Indeed, if we're going to preserve the value and sincerity of a friendship, there is one such cause of offense that has simply got to be endured. That is to say, you're under an obligation not only to advise your friend frequently, but to rebuke them if necessary. And when this is done to yourself and done in a spirit of goodwill, one must take it to good heart. Unfortunately, however, there is also a good deal of truth in what my friend Terence said in his Woman of Andros. Flattery gets us friends, but truth earns ill will. Certainly, truth of that kind can be very disagreeable, since it does indeed produce ill will, and ill will is what poisons friendships. But flattery is, in fact, much the more tiresome disadvantage of the two, because while it indulges a friend's misdeeds, it is also contributing to their ruin. And most capable of all is the friend who spurns the truth and allows flattery to seduce them into doing wrong. This whole matter requires rational and discreet handling. Advice must not be harsh or criticism offensive. If we are going to flatter, to use Terence's word, let it be just a form of courtesy entirely free of any servile elements, since servility is what aids and abets every sort of viciousness and is unworthy not only of a friend, but of any free man at all. Life with a friend is not like life with a tyrant. A man whose ears are so completely closed to the truth that he cannot even hear it from a friend is a hopeless case. Cato spoke shrewdly as so often when he remarked, in some ways our wisest, our worst enemies do us greater services than our friends, who seem so agreeable, since enemies often tell us the truth, whereas friends never do. Certainly, it is irrational if you are criticized not to feel annoyed when you hear something that warrants annoyance, but to feel furious about a remark which ought not to upset you at all. You are annoyed not because you have done wrong, but because you are blamed for it. Whereas that what you ought to do, but uh, whereas what you ought to be feeling sorry about is the wrong you have done, and when it is corrected, you ought to be glad. So it is an essential feature of genuine friendship both to offer advice and to receive it. The advice should be given frankly, not but harshly, and received with patience and no trace of resentment. There can be no worse blot on a friendship than fawning sycophancy and adulation. Call this by whatever name you like it. It can only be branded as a vice characteristic of unreliable, insincere men who like to speak in a fashion calculated to give pleasure without the slightest regard for the truth. Hypocrisy is bound to be vicious because it saps and contaminates our standards of truthfulness, and this makes it wholly incompatible with friendship, which must be truthful if it is to have any meaning at all. The significance of friendship is that it unites human hearts, but this cannot happen if one of the personalities involved fails to remain consistently the same, and instead takes on a variety of shifting and changeable forms. For it is impossible to imagine anything more devious and tortuous than an individual who is prepared to transform his own personality in obedience not only to someone else's feelings and opinions, but even to the very expression on the other person's face. He says no, and I say no. He says yes, and I say yes. In other words, I have made it my duty to agree with him in everything. That is Terence again. But now he is speaking in the character of Nathal, the sort of friend whom nobody but a fool would want. There are a great many people about who, even if they are Nathal's superiors in position and wealth and reputation, behave exactly like him all the same. And when you have a man who is not only insecure but influential, this so fantasy becomes really dangerous. The psycho fancy becomes really dangerous. However, if you are careful, it is possible to tell a hypocritical friend from a real one. You can keep the two sorts apart in the same way as you can distinguish any other sham or fake from the authentic original. A public meeting consists of wholly inexperienced people, and yet, when gathered together, they can usually tell the difference between a demagogue, that is to say, a politician of the smooth tongued, unreliable sort, and a statesman who is reliable and truthful and honest. A short time ago, Gaius Papirius Carbo insinuated himself into the favor of the assembly by proposing a law to make tribunes of the people eligible for re-election for a second term of office. I spoke against him, but never mind about me. It is Scipio I want to talk about. Heavens, what an impressive, imposing speech he made. You might have thought he was head of the whole Roman state. not just one private citizen among many. However, you were both there listening to him, and in any case, his speech is available for all to read. As a result of his words, the bill in question, which was meant to please the people, was turned down. The people themselves turned it down. To return to myself, you must remember when Scipio's brother Quintus Fabius Maximus and Lucius Hostilius Marcanus were consuls, how popular Gaius Gracchus' bill about priestly appointments seemed likely to be. Such appointments had previously been arranged by cooptation, cooptation, and it was now proposed to transfer them, together with all the immense patronage they carried, to the popular vote. Crassus also made another democratic gesture. He was the first man who ever turned to face the forum while addressing the assembly. I was called upon to speak in reply, and it turned out that his specious arguments could be defeated quite easily. What I did was to appeal to the reverence we all ought to feel towards the immortal gods. These events took place while I was only praetor. I did not become consul for another 5 years. In other words, what won the debate was not influence derived from rank, but the merits of the case itself on the stage then, for that is what those public meetings amount to. The ample opportunities that exist for lies and misrepresentations still cannot prevent truth from winning the day. Once it is revealed and brought out into the light, how much more then must this act lead to friendship, of which truth is indispensable condition? Between friends, unless the other person bars his soul to you and you bar yours to him, there can be no question of loyalty and certainty, or for that matter, or of loving and being loved, since concealment would make it quite impossible to estimate whether there is any genuine feeling at all. Just now I was speaking of these who flatter their friends. Disastrous though this practice is, it can only do real harm to someone who enjoys receiving the flattery, for any one who listens readily to psychopaths makes himself a victim of self-love and complacency. Now here is an apparent analogy with genuine goodness or virtue, because that quality too shares this capacity for loving itself, for it knows itself best, and in consequence it apprehends that it is worthy of love. But people who enjoy being flattered are not really after virtue at all, but merely the outward semblance of virtue. For a lot of people are less concerned to be virtuous than to look it. Such are the individuals who enjoy listening to flattery, and when they hear talk calculated to please them, they regard the empty phrases as clear demonstrations of what models of perfection they must be. But a friendship in which one partner does not want to hear the truth and the other is prepared to tell lies can only be utterly meaningless. When we are watching a comedy on the stage, it's true, we find the servility of the parasites amusing instead of disgusting. But that is because the dramatist relieves it with the contrasting humor of that other stock type, the swaggering soldier. Did they really seem grateful for my present? Asked one of these warriors. It would have been enough to answer, yes, very grateful. But the parasite prefers the reply, gigantically grateful. If the person who is being flattered wants something to be large, a sycophant always makes it larger still. Now, when people welcome and encourage this kind of acting, it has its effect on them. And even tougher, better balanced characters need to be warned that they must defend themselves vigilantly against this craftier forms of servile behavior. If someone goes in for servility of the most open kind, nobody but a downright fool will fall for it. But what we must be on our guard against is letting the subtle secret operator worm his way behind our defenses. He is hard to recognize because he often conceals his flattery beneath the appearance of offering opposition. That is to say, he pretends to disagree, but finally pays the other person the compliment of giving in and allowing himself to be defeated, thus creating the impression that his companion had been more farsighted than himself. To allow oneself to be made a fool of in such a way is shameful. We must take precaution against such a thing happening to ourselves. Today you've tricked me, said the character in a comedy, and made a worse fool of me than all the old fools of the comic stage. For in plays, too, the silliest characters are always the old men who have so little sense that they always believe everything they're told. But somehow or other, I have drifted away from my theme. What I had proposed to talk about was friendship between good men, that is to say, wise men. Wise, I mean, according to practical human standards, but instead I have started discussing friendships of a more trivial nature. So let me now return to my original subject and finally bring the matter to a conclusion. What unites friends in the first place, Franius and Scarola, and what keeps them friends is goodness of character. All harmony and permanence and fidelity come from that when this moral quality appears and reveals its brilliant light and perceives and recognizes the same illumination in another person. It is impelled in their direction and receives their radiant beams, and that is how love or friendship comes into existence. Both words, amor and amicitia, come from amare, to love, and love is precisely the nature of the affection you feel for your friend. Certainly, it does not require the promoting of any advantage. Advantage does, it is true, grow out of friendship, whether you have intentionally pursued such a benefit or not. But that is another matter. This was the sort of affection which I myself, when I was young, felt towards certain men who were already quite old. Lucius Paulus Marcus Cato Gaius Sulpius Gallus Publius Narcia, and the elder Tiberius Gracchus, the father-in-law of my friend Sergio. But the feeling shines brightest when it is shared by persons of the same age, like Scipio, Lucius Furius, Philus Publius Ruprius, Suporius, Mormius, and myself. However, now that I myself am old, I enjoy my friendships with young people such as yourselves and Quintus Alius Tibero. I also greatly appreciate my friend relations with very young men like Publius Rutilius Rufus and Orlos Varginius. And yet, all the same, life and human nature being what they are, with a new generation always coming up, the most satisfying thing of all really is to reach the end of the race with the same companions who were with you at the starting post. Since everything that is mortal is precarious and transient, we ought always to go on, searching for people who can receive our love and be loved by us in return. Without affection and kindly feeling, life can hold no joys. Scipio was suddenly snatched away, but for me he is still living and always will be. What I loved him for was his goodness, and this is something that has not died. When he was alive, it was always with me, and the vision remains with me still. Indeed, every generation to come, for all eternity, will continue to be illuminated by the glory and renown of his noble character. All men forevermore who have the courage and hope to embark on great enterprises will be certain to cherish in their hearts the memory and example of that man. As for myself, not one of the good things that fortune or nature has bestowed on me could begin to compare with my friendship with Scipio. One of its features was the total harmony between us on matters of state. Another aspect was the advice he was always prepared to give me about all my private affairs, and our leisure hours together were a source of unfailing pleasure. To the best of my knowledge, I never caused him irritation, and he never once addressed to me a single word I would have preferred unsaid. We shared the same house, we ate the same meals, and we ate them side by side. Together we were soldiers, together we traveled, together we went for our country holidays. Every minute of our spare time, as you know, we devoted to study and research, withdrawn from the eyes of the world, but enjoying the company of one another. If my recollection of all these doings had perished with Scipio when he died, the loss of my friend who was so utterly close and dear to me would be unendurable. But the picture of them in my mind was not passed away. My memory keeps the vision alive, and it becomes even more wonderful as time goes. In any case, even if I had lost the power to recall these things, my age would be some comfort, for it means that I shall not have to endure my bereavement for very long. Even the severest of burdens can be borne provided their duration is short. That then is what I have to say about this friendship. No one can be a friend unless he is a good man. But next to goodness itself, I entreat you to regard friendship as the finest thing in all the world. Thank you for joining us today. We've really covered friendship. Friendships seem to be the main theme there. And that was a good thing about today. It's that's what I've learned to do is navigate my environment and learn and to truly learn who I going to put my energy into. Am I going to invest my efforts? Am I going to invest into a connection with somebody? Then let just like Cicero mission. Let me test out this friend. Not a test as in to see what they can do, but let me just interact. Let me interact without being emotionally connected. Let me just interact. Let me see if we actually are compatible as friends and have a mutual understanding of good things. And truly, that has helped me in my life to not make connections that would drag me down because I've spent the time of my past separating and leaving the energies that I no longer want to be a part of, the systems and the attitudes that I have found to not be supportive of a long term friendship. A friendship, very much like a garden. You can take care of that garden, you can water it, you can make sure you don't trample on it. Might need to run through it one day, get through the field. You're going to come back through and check on your plants, so forth and so on. If we don't look at the environment of which we are participating or who we are speaking with or enjoying our time with or whatever the circumstance for that, by not caring for it, can easily rot away. But the maintenance and the care of that sort of a friendship, of that sort of a connection, certainly through prayer, through telepathic connection, through meditation, through learning together, through being on the same wavelength. Truly, by watering that garden, we can have enduring and lasting friendships in which we're not going up and down to any old whim or wham. Again, thanks for being with us today. I hope you have a blessed day and Donna Day Kauai. Till we see you next time. Love you, bro.